Thank you. We will now resume consideration of amendments, and we shall turn to Group 6 on reporting and planning in relation to deer. I call Amendment 20 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, and I call on Minister Jim Fairley to move Amendment 20 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Minister, could we please have your card in? And Minister, could you just start from the beginning again, please? Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and my apologies to the Chamber. My Amendment 20 seeks to address the issues raised by members and stakeholders during the Stage 2 proceedings. And I want to thank Mr Ruskell, Ms Grant and Ms Hamilton, all of whom I met earlier this month to discuss those concerns, and I am grateful for their willingness to work collaboratively on this amendment. I have also taken into account and into consideration the conversations I have had with Mr Eagle following his Stage 2 amendments in relation to financial support for deer management. We all share the same ambition, that is to see venison recognised as one of our key national assets, and it is a vital component to addressing rising deer populations. Amendment 20 introduces a relatively straightforward plan that will require Scottish ministers to set out their deer management priorities, how we will support people to deliver those through specific measures and actions, and how we can maximise the opportunities that venison can bring. So for these reasons, I urge members to support my Amendment 20 to introduce a national deer management and venison plan, and I move Amendment 20 in my name. I want to talk now about 20A and 20B in the name of Mark Ruskell, and I recognise the intention behind the amendments 20A and 20B, but I can't support them. Amendment 20A would require ministers to set national density targets and annual cull quotas. That risks imposing a one-size-fits-all approach that does not reflect the very real regional variation in deer impacts, species or land use, and it cuts across our commitment not to treat deer as a pest species, because they aren't. They are an asset to Scotland. The Government's approach is instead targeted and evidence-led, and we have already set out a broad ambition to increase deer culls by around 25%, focusing effort where deer pose the greatest environmental risk. Amendment 20B then seeks to lock in delivery and funding arrangements for those national targets before the underpinning data is robust and before we know what intervention is appropriate in different places. So for those reasons, I would urge members to vote against Amendments 20A and 20B. Amendments 20C and 20D, as with Amendments A and B, I recognise the intention behind the amendments, but I do not believe they are necessary. I agree that access to venison processing facilities and community larders is important. That is why the venison industry, key venison facilities and venison supply chains is already included in the National Deer Management and Venison Plan. However, providing this level of detail in the plan is not appropriate, and it is repetitive given that venison is already included. So for those reasons, I urge members to vote against Amendment 20C and D. Amendment 20E is not strictly necessary. However, I appreciate the member's aims here, and I will be happy to support it. Amendment 20 requires ministers to consult Nature Scot, those undertaking deer management, the venison industry and anyone else that ministers consider appropriate. Now, that allows full discretion to consult environmental nature restoration bodies where relevant. However, I know that the member is keen to ensure that the National Deer Management Plan is centred around the environmental impact of deer populations and our priority in tackling those. We would, of course, consult these environmental nature conservation organisations with an interest in the National Deer Management Plan as part of the ongoing process, so I see no reason not to set that out here, and for those reasons I urge members to support Amendment 20E. Amendment 33, in the name of Emma Harper, is a helpful and constructive addition to the National Deer Management and Venison Plan. It recognised that deer management in Scotland is about far more than red deer on the Open Hill Range. It makes clear that when preparing or reviewing the National Deer Management and Venison Plan, ministers may take into account the very different circumstances in which deer are managed, the challenges and the costs involved, the species and the numbers of deer present, and the need to balance environmental, social, economic and welfare considerations. This amendment strengthens the national plan by reflecting real-world complexity across both Highland and Lowland Scotland, and I encourage members to support it. Amendment 89, in the name of Mark Ruskell, seeks to establish a national deer management programme, but it goes significantly further than the approach that the Government supports. While we agree on the importance of having a national plan, this amendment would hardwire into legislation detailed population estimates, geographically broken down cull targets and delivery requirements that does not reflect the regional variation and complexity of deer management across Scotland. Amendment 98 risks imposing a one-size-fits-all model, whereas Amendment 20 provides a more balanced, flexible and deliverable framework. So for those reasons, I ask Member not to press Amendment 98, but if he does, I urge members to vote against it. Amendment 59 in the name of Beatrice Wishart. I appreciate the intention behind the amendment, and I thank Ms Wishart for highlighting the importance of transparency in deer management, because we share that goal. However, placing a statutory duty to deliver a national dashboard within 5 years risks a significant resource burden, and it may not resolve the current data gaps. We are already strengthening the evidence base through Nature Scot's new Deer app, by improving cull returns via the Fit and Competent Register and trial dashboards at Nature Scot and Forestry and Land Scotland. Our focus is on getting the data right first and then presenting it well. On that basis, I would ask the member not to press the amendment. Amendment 136 in the name of Tim Eagle. And I understand the intention behind this as well, and the desire to see the early reassurances that the changes in the bill are working as intended. However, reducing the review period from 10 to 5 years is not appropriate, because the objectives that we are seeking to assess, such as restoring the natural heritage, achieving the aims of deer management and improving deer welfare, are long-term outcomes that cannot be fully evidenced within 5 years. It's also important that we have at least one national deer management plan in place and progressing before undertaking a meaningful review. So a 10-year timescale provides a more realistic and robust basis for assessing both the effectiveness and any unintended consequences. So for those reasons, I would ask the member not to press, and if he does, I would vote against it in Amendment 136. Amendment 137, also in the name of Tim Eagle, would require the review of the changes to deer legislation to report on every modification made by the bill to the 1996 Act that has been used during the review period. However, the bill makes changes across much of the Act, and it is not clear what used means in this context. The amendment as drafted risks turning the review exercise into a lengthy and technical inventory rather than a focused assessment of whether the changes are delivering better environmental outcomes, effective deer management and improved deer welfare. And although the wording of the amendment means it cannot be accepted, I understand what Mr Eagle is trying to get at, and I'd like to provide him reassurance that the review will include any provisions that haven't been commenced and reasons why that is the case, or indeed any that are in force but have not been relied upon. So for the reasons I've said, I'd ask the member not to press that amendment. If he does, I'd ask members to vote against it. Amendments 138 and 139 in the name of Edward Mountain. Again, I understand the desire behind these amendments to ensure that a wide range of voices are heard when reviewing the effectiveness of the changes to deer legislation. But I do not believe it is helpful to prescribe consultation so tightly in legislation. As drafted, ministers must consult Nature Scot and may consult anyone else that they consider appropriate. That already provides the flexibility to engage with those with practical experience of deer management or those with a wider interest where that will add value. Making these groups mandatory consultees would, in practice, require a broad public consultation and significantly reduce the flexibility. It is better to retain the discretion so that the consultation can be proportionate and targeted. So for those reasons, I would urge members to vote against Amendments 138 and 139. Amendment 140 would make explicit that when a report on the effectiveness of changes made by the bill is laid before Parliament, a copy must be sent to the relevant lead committee. That's an amendment from Tim Eagle. And in practice, this already happens whenever a report is laid before Parliament, so the amendment does not materially change the current arrangements. However, it does clarify the process on the face of the bill, so I'm happy to support that amendment, and I would urge members to do the same. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Mark Ruskell to move Amendment 28 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Ruskell.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I did move a Stage 2 amendment to establish a national deer management programme, and the aim of that was to set clear expectations on deer management targets for landowners and provide strategic direction at a national level. But I didn't just pull it out of my head. That was a key recommendation of the Independent Deer Working Group's report that was accepted by this government in 2021. In fact, I think it was in a programme for government that this was something which this government wanted to deliver. So I'm a little surprised now if the Minister is saying that actually there's elements of that that are a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's not appropriate, and that's really not where we're going, because that feels like a quite subtle change in policy and direction for this government. And I think it does beg the question about where does that independent deer management working group report sit now with government? Is it continuing to work through those recommendations? Is it adopting recommendation 97, which has already appeared in a PFG? And in effect, the purpose of that was to, approach was to lower deer numbers. It was to ensure that the population is managed at a level where public health, particularly road safety, Lyme's disease, is under control, and that impacts on nature restoration are minimised. So it had a very strong public health, a very strong ecological basis. So I am bringing back 98 because I'm acting in the spirit of the Independent Deer Working Group's report. I'm bringing their specific proposal, their specific ask back to the Chamber to be voted on. Now, notwithstanding that, I appreciate the openness that the Minister has had between Stage 2 and Stage 3. And, we have had a discussion about the importance of seeing venison and deer as a resource and the need to give greater support to the venison sector. And, of course, we'd like to see venison in more public canteens. I'd like to see it in more local shops and making a contribution there. But I think a balance needs to be struck between having greater oversight of deer management for the purpose of advancing nature restoration, while at the same time ensuring there's that growing market for venison. And I'm still a little confused, Minister, as to where your priorities, where the Minister's priorities really sit within that. There does need to be parity here. I mean, deer management is essentially about an ecological decision that needs to be taken to restore nature and to deal with those public health issues. It can't be dependent on the vagaries of a food supply chain market, which is dominated often by supermarkets. So I'm not clear if we're into the same. I will give way. I'm not clear if we're into the same territory here as the debates that we've had in this chamber on organic food, where actually there's a reluctance to increase the scale of the organic sector if the market doesn't meet its demand. I'm wary of relying on market demand for venison to actually drive what should be ecological decisions about protecting and restoring nature. I'll give way to the Minister.
Minister.
I thank Mark Ruskell for giving way to that for this intervention, but I think he's mischaracterising what the deer management plan actually does. We've set out in the legislation in this bill that there will be targets and there will be the powers there to allow Nature Scot to do it. But what we're adding into that is the fact that we're going to use venison as a product to be savoured by Scotland rather than seeing deer as a problem. And I think we've got to get that balance right. I think our amendment does that, and I think the member's amendment is far too prescriptive.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, if that is the case, and I accept that, and I think that's a useful clarification, then I don't really understand why the Minister isn't then supporting 20A and 20B, because 20A would add in population estimates for deer, it would add in cull targets, 20B would ensure that ministers set out how they will ensure that Nature Scot is funded to meet the requirements of population estimates and cull targets. So, putting deer management on the basis that the Independent Deer Working Group requested that government do, requires something which is much more explicit than what I think is laid out in legislation and is laid out in the Minister's Amendment 20. So that's why I've, as well as giving the option of 98, which I think is a lot clearer, I've also brought forward the option of amending the amendment that the Minister has brought forward, just to make it absolutely crystal clear what we're talking about here. I'll give way again if the Minister wishes to intervene.
So I hope the member understands that what we are doing is we're making sure that we've got that balance, because he also agrees that we cannot do this without deer managers and deer managers who know what they're doing on the ground. What the proposal that we are putting forward in this amendment of mine ensures that the deer management community know that they are being supported, as well as having the ability to be able to use venison in our foods market and bringing in those targets or bringing in those requirements for people to reduce deer numbers with the legislation that's been brought forward in this bill.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I understand where the Minister's coming from, but I think to an extent he's reworking the recommendations of the Independent Deer Working Group. I mean, these voices were there in that process. They came to these conclusions after a very long process. So it feels like policy is evolving here. I'm not 100% sure which way it's going at this point. I mean, I do welcome... I just kind of can make a little bit of progress. So I mean, I do welcome the Minister's support for 20E. I mean, the Minister's saying that it's not really necessary to involve environmental and nature restoration sectors, but, you know, why not? We'll do that anyway. So, you know, I mean, okay, I'll take that. I welcome that. I do think Parliament, you know, has a bit of a choice to make here. I mean, 98 is clear. 98 is what this government signed up to and was in the programme for government. If policy is evolving in a slightly different direction, where it's more about working with the market for venison, then at least put the population estimates into the plan, at least ensure that Nature Scott's got a proper funded role to do what the independent working group wanted it to do, and at least ensure that those hugely important voices for environment and nature restoration are consulted on this as well. That's the purpose of my amendments to the Minister's amendment. That's the purpose of my 98. I'm probably just going to leave it there at that point.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. I now call Tim Eagle to speak to Amendment 20C and other amendments in the group. Mr Eagle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, the Minister and I don't always agree on everything, but we've had some good discussions, I think, around the Part 4 of this bill, and around particularly the point which I think he is right to talk about is the value of venison to Scotland, rather than seeing it as something negative. And I do commend that, because I think that's something exactly where we want to go. That said, I've got a few amendments here that I thought would help the bill, and I'm grateful for his comments in his opening speech. My Amendment 20C and 20D amend the Minister's amendment that will establish a deer management and venison plan, which is a very good thing. They require the plan to include or to consider the introduction of a pilot for community larders and wider processing infrastructure for the process of increasing production capacity for venison. I welcome the Minister's amendment establishing the plan, but question whether more needs to be done to deal with the need for more processing support, and that I've heard directly from people on the ground. I want to see deer managers maintained and be able to expand their levels of venison production. Venison is a nutritious food source that Scotland could have in abundance. It is also a potentially growing market. However, unfortunately, such activity has often been privately funded and loss-making. Nature Scott have already begun a number of pilots, incentivised schemed, but more needs to be done. Therefore, it will respond to direct calls from those dealing with venison to have incentive schemes and their wider rollout considered as part of the plan. Not only could we see more venison more widely supplied, but it could aid the government in achieving objectives surrounding food and deer. In terms of Amendments 136, 137 and 140, as currently drafted, the bill sets out that ministers are required to review the effectiveness of parts of Part 4 within 10 years of Section 33A coming into force. My Amendment 136 seeks to reduce this to 5 years to ensure a speedier review and increase consultation with those implementing the legislation. My Amendment 137 further amends the Minister's reporting requirements on Part 4. It requires the report to include information on whether any provision under the 1996 Act, modified by Part 4, has not been used. And my final amendment in this group, number 140, which I'm pleased to see the Minister is supporting, requires the report to be sent to the appropriate Scottish Parliament committee to increase scrutiny and accountability. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I call Emma Harper to speak to Amendment 33 and other amendments in the group. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I set out during the Stage 2 proceedings, I am keen that we recognise the wide and complex range of circumstances in which deer exist and are managed in Scotland. It is also important to recognise, and I know the Minister does, that there are more than just red deer in Scotland. Roe deer numbers, for example, are increasing in Scotland, including in urban and peri-urban areas. I welcome the contact from an engagement with one of the South Scotland deer managers, David Quarrell, as well as other local deer managers. And I know David has been able to highlight to me that the local challenges of managing deer in urban and peri-urban areas, there are different approaches that need to be considered when creating a national deer management plan, considering habitats and species, for example. And I thank the Minister for his comments and meeting me about this and about my wishes for this amendment to go forward. Management solutions must be flexible and must be locally driven, not part of a one-size-fits-all national plan. Many deer managers are volunteers or recreational shooters who can and do contribute significantly to control efforts. And I know the Minister has mentioned already there are different approaches in the Highlands and with lowland deer management as well. It's been raised with me that the requirement for equipment and other associated costs to be self-funded may be a barrier to engagement in lowland deer management, or a barrier for young people who may wish to enter into deer management as well. I'm very pleased to see the Minister bring forward an amendment for a national deer management plan that seeks to address these concerns, and my Amendment 33 is intended to complement that amendment and to set out the kinds of information I am keen to see included in that national plan, and I urge members to support it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I now call Beatrice Wishart to speak to Amendment 59 and other amendments in the group. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 59 seeks to establish a single deer management dashboard for the whole of Scotland as a means to record, collate and publish data relating to deer management in Scotland, set out in an open and transparent way. And I'd like to thank ScotLink for their engagement on this issue. The amendment would require that there's a means to bring together data on deer and deer management to be shared widely with land managers, and it would create a unified process of data management and presentation. And it's important as data is the basis for informing and delivering sustainable deer management. In other similar European countries, such data is readily available to wildlife management practitioners. Members will recall we discussed this matter at stage 2 and heard from the Minister about the pilot of the Nature Scot app, in which data on deer management can be recorded. The app is a welcome step, but it's still under development. I thank the Minister for meeting with me to discuss further following stage 2, and I note that he is still not minded to support this amendment today, but I appreciate that he's put on the record the Scottish Government's commitment to getting the data right in the first place. So I would hope that in future there will be deer data management recording systems with publicly accessible data sets in the interests of transparency.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. And I call on Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 138 and other amendments of the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm going to keep my comments in this group to Amendments 138 and 139, which I've submitted. Presiding Officer, looking at this bill, there seems to be a lot of plans for plans and reviews of plans to create the plans, which will then need review. For me, it seems complicated and overcomplicated, and I was surprised to be accused of bureaucracy by the Minister in the last set of amendments. There is a huge amount in here. So my amendments 138 and 139 are very simple. 138 is to ensure that ministers consult those with practical experience in deer management when they prepare a review of the modifications to the Deer Scotland Act 1996. And Amendment 139 obliges ministers to consult those with an interest in deer management when they conduct the same review, getting the people there who know what they're talking about and have experience of doing it. Simple, really. That's why I'm moving them, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. And I call on Minister Jim Fairley to wind up on Amendment 20.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This bill is bringing into effect the Deer Working Group recommendations that requires us to produce a deer management plan. We are working to gather better data on deer, and I expect that any plan to tackle the data gaps will come out of that. So I would ask members to accept the amendments that I've put forward and the other ones I've mentioned.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Mark Ruskell to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 20A.
I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
And could you press or withdraw Amendment?
Press A, yeah, 20A.
You're pressing Amendment 20A, thank you. So the question is that Amendment 20A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Jenny Minto.
Apologies, my app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Minto. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 20A in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes, 26, no, 80. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 20B in the name of Mark Ruskell, ready debated with amendment 20. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 20B be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 20B in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes, 25, no, 81. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 20C in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with amendment 20. Tim Eagle, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 20C be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 20. The result of the vote on amendment number 20C in the name of Tim Eagle is yes, 51, no, 56. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 20D in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with amendment 20. Tim Eagle, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 20D be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. The members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 20D in the name of Tim Eagle is yes, 49, no, 55. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 20E in the name of Mark Ruskell, Already debated with Amendment 20. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 20E be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 20E in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes, 78, no, 28. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I now call on Minister Jim Fairley to press or withdraw Amendment 20 as amended.
Press.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 20 as amended be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 20 as amended in the name of Jim Fairley is yes, 105, no, 1. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore agreed. And I call Amendment 33 in the name of Emma Harper, already debated with Amendment 20. Emma Harper to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 33 in the name of Emma Harper is yes, 100, no, 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. We now turn to Group 7 on venison. I call Amendment 97 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, grouped with Amendments 132, 133, 134 and 135. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to move Amendment 97 and to speak to all amendments of the group. Ms Hamilton.
Move, Presiding Officer. Amendment 97 is about ensuring that deer management is considered in the round and that venison is properly recognised as part of that solution. And during stage 2, I raised concerns about the need for a clearer focus on venison alongside colleagues from across the chamber. I welcome the collaborative work that has taken place since then, which has led to venison being included within the National Deer Management and Venison Plan, introduced through Jim Fairley's Amendment 20. This amendment strengthens that approach by requiring consideration of what barriers exist to the effective operation of venison processing facilities and to consult those with expertise in the venison industry. That is essential if we are to be serious about supporting the sector, increasing capacity and getting more high-quality Scottish venison into our supply chains. I'm particularly keen to see more venison served in public settings, and this amendment will help move us in that direction. And for those reasons, I urge members to support my Amendment 97, and as I have done, I move that again. But on Amendment 133 and 134, at stage 2, I was very keen to see standalone amendments, and I know the sector are also very keen to see the work that was done at stage 2 replicated at stage 3, to see if my colleagues will, across the chamber, will support these standalone venison amendments. I want to thank Richard Playfair, Richard Cook, Ross Ewing, Peter Clark, Deirdre Stewart, Lindsay Seafe-Wright, Nick MacLeod and Alan MacDonald, and other members of the deer management groups. I'd also like to thank Lauren Houston of Glenkilry, and I know that she has been making an amazing proposals and promoting venison, and I know that Jim Fairley will be aware of Lauren's work. So, Amendment 133 addresses processing issues and requires ministers to introduce a venison action plan which sets out how deer larders, butchery facilities and distributors can be best utilised to maximise the amount of venison available for human consumption. And Amendment 134 addresses the lack of use of this particular protein in the public sector and requires ministers to introduce a venison action plan which sets out what action Scottish ministers will take to ensure public bodies regularly offer venison as a meal. It also includes an onus on ministers to take action to remove barriers to demand and supply. As highlighted at stage 2, venison is a very good source of micronutrients. It's high in protein and can be locally sourced. However, there is no current requirement for public bodies to use venison, and uptake across local authorities and health boards is minimal. Only one local authority in Scotland serves venison in schools, and no health board offers it to patients. Both amendments build on my previous amendments, as I said, at stage 2, and include how these plans will be designed and enforced following stakeholder suggestions, and this could be done by experts. Amendment 135 is slightly unique. The amendment is designed to encourage the recovery and donation of surplus venison meat. It requires ministers to consider how much venison meat is utilised for human consumption and how much is destroyed. It would also establish a fund to create incentives to surplus venison meat to be donated, and create a group to make recommendations as to what the incentives should be and raise awareness of the availability of donated venison meat. This amendment has been developed from some research that I did on an Italian law. It's called the GADA law, which is framed around affordable, healthy eating and has helped reduce food waste across Italy. And that was following a visit to Italy recently where pretty much venison was on every single menu that was offered in every single restaurant and cafe, which means that they're obviously utilising their meat very well. But Scotland is supposed to be on its way to becoming a good food nation, and yet food insecurity has not improved. In the Scottish Government's latest health survey, around 8% of adults were worried about running out of food due to lack of money, and the Trussell Trust also found that 1 million people face food insecurity, and we continue to see near record levels of hunger and hardship in communities across Scotland. And this despite 1 million tonnes of food and drink being wasted in Scotland in 2021. The donation of venison to food banks and those in need in Scotland and the UK is not a novel idea. For example, the Countryside Food Trust worked with deer stalkers to cull 884 deer in Sussex last year, which provided around 170,000 meals for 69 food banks. Projects have also
Ms Hamilton,
been established.
terribly sorry to interrupt. Could you resume your seat just for a second?
Yes.
I would just say there's quite a lot of background noise in the chamber, and it's difficult, really, I think, for all members who are keen to listen to this debate to actually hear what is, in fact, being said. Please resume, Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am just about to conclude, but there are similar projects to this in the Cairngorms National Park. Amendment 135 aims to ensure that we make the most of venison, which is very healthy and a nutritious product. Amendment 132, I won't say much about this amendment in the name of Edward Mountain, but I will leave him to explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. And I call Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 132 and other amendments in the group. Mr Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I would just take members back to the reason for the 1996 Act. For those of you that remember that was at stages quite high poaching across Scotland. In fact, there were numerous occasions of vehicles stopping on the edge of the A9, deer being shot on the edge of the A9 and hauled off and sold. And one of the protections to prevent poaching was the deer and licensing to deal in venison, which is why I've got this amendment in, because I want to understand if we're going to get to the stage where we are going to be hopefully having a deer population that's manageable and sustainable, that the high levels of culls that we will need to achieve that will no longer be required, which will make venison more attractive and therefore probably increase the likelihood of poaching. So therefore, licences to deal in venison, records to be kept by venison dealers, which are really important in the sense for those of you that take deer into a venison dealer, you have to prove where it was shot and you have to say it was fit and healthy when it was shot, there was nothing abnormal about its behaviour. All of this is being withdrawn, and I find that quite odd, which is why I put this Amendment 132 in to see if I can probe the Minister into explaining why he feels none of that is no longer necessary. Those of us, I think, that are involved in deer management feel that this would be a loss. Turning to the amendments of my colleague Rachel Hamilton, I totally agree with what she's trying to achieve regarding venison. Venison is a great, nutritious meal. We should be eating a lot more of it, especially if we're having to kill a lot more of it. And I would just remind the Chamber that just prior to Christmas, it got to the stage where venison dealers were no longer prepared to take deer in because they couldn't sell them. There was just too much there. And a lot of the big venison dealers have got so much in cold store at the moment, they're not quite sure what to do with it. Well, we could be using it, we could be eating it, and that's why I support Rachel Hamilton's amendment. Presiding Officer, I would just say two other things on this. When I think in Rachel Hamilton's amendment, she's put about ensuring that venison isn't dumped, I think is one of the expressions within there. And I agree. I find it totally unacceptable that people shoot deer and dump them on the hill, making no effort to recover them. That is a disgrace, and it shouldn't happen in Scotland, unless there's an environmental reason for doing it. Just because it's too difficult to extract it is not a good reason. And the other point I would just make on this, when the venison plan is drawn up, Presiding Officer, I do hope the Scottish Government will consider how Forestry and Land Scotland larders, which are being built at the huge expense by the taxpayer, can be available to those people that the government are asking to cull deer on their behalf if they don't have larder facilities. I'll leave it at that, and I'll wait to hear the Minister's response, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. And I call Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. On Amendment 97, I think it's absolutely critical that we look at deer management as a whole, as Rachel Hamilton said. So we're creating plans, and that is why, in collaboration with Rachel Hamilton, Rhoda Grant and Mark Ruskell, who raised the issue at Stage 2, we have included the venison within the National Deer Management Plan that I proposed through Amendment 20. This amendment requires us to consider what barriers exist in relation to the effective operation of venison processing facilities and to consult relevant people. As I set out during Stage 2 debate, I want to see the way we talk about deer management shift. I want it to focus instead on venison product that we can harvest, and I'm also very keen to increase the amount of venison making its way onto the menus in our public spaces, and I think that the National Deer Management and Venison Plan, along with this amendment, will help us to achieve that aim. So it's for these reasons I would urge members to support Amendment 97. On Amendment 132, I fundamentally disagree with the member's intentions to prevent the repeal of the venison dealer's licence in this bill. Time and time again in Parliament we have heard how important it is to raise the profile of venison and to increase consumption of it. Not to mention, this was debated at Stage 2 of the bill, the venison dealer's licence is acting as a barrier to these goals, and I think it's entirely suitable for venison to follow the same protocols as other wild game. I want to increase its availability while maintaining those high food standards. In addition to this, Food Standards Scotland has confirmed that traceability of wild salmon can be maintained through existing food safety and hygiene legislation, which applies to all meat and wild game. Ultimately, the venison dealer's licence is no longer fit for purpose, and it is for these reasons that I would urge the members to oppose Amendment 132. Finally, on Amendments 133 and 134, which seek to make better use of venison by requiring Scottish ministers to prepare venison action plans. I'm a bit saddened that Ms Hamilton has brought these forward, given the multiple constructive conversations we have had since Stage 2 in an effort to reach agreement on these venison amendments. As I have just stated, it is critical that we look at deer management as a whole when we create these action plans. I fully agree with the sentiment of maximising the benefits of venison, but I believe this can be achieved through our National Deer Management and Venison Plan as introduced in my Amendment 20. Creating stand-alone plans focused solely on venison risks overlooking the wider objectives and the need for those integrated solutions. So with regard to Amendment 135, we are taking forward various strands of work on venison, including looking at how we can learn from Wild Jura Venison project, where products are being distributed in schools. I think there are some fundamental flaws with the proposal. Amendment 135 also requires ministers to introduce a fund to incentivise the donation of venison. If someone is being paid to donate, I'm not sure that counts as donation. And I want to see a flourishing venison market, and I am taking steps forward to make sure that I support that. I would therefore ask the member not to press Amendments 133, 134 and 135, and if they are pressed, I would strongly urge members to oppose them. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 97. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I won't be saying too many words because, I am going to press all of the amendments. I do want to thank Jim Fairley for his collaborative working. And I know that the government moved quite strongly to include the venison plan to sort of come together or come closer to the sector, which was really important. I think what I do want to make the point and put it on record is that I did bring the standalone amendments back at Stage 3 because I know that the sector, that the deer management groups were really quite nervous about kind of the rolling in of the venison plan rather than having it as a standalone amendment. I do think this is a good compromise because I don't believe that the government, as Jim Fairley has stated, will go any further. But I just want to recognise that the groups that have done all the work to establish the deer management plan are the ones who really wanted the venison action plan as standalone, and I know that I've already shared that with the Minister. I think I just moved the amendments, Minister, because I just want to make the point, and I don't want the sector to feel as though I haven't listened to them and I have left them behind. I wanted to bring them along with us over the years. And, the other thing is that I would just like to say that I'm pleased and I recognise the commitment that the government have made and that Jim Fairley has listened to some extent. I'm disappointed that he doesn't like my GADA law because the Italians do it very well, and I would recommend Jim Fairley to go and have a visit out to Italy. You could still get out to the Alps and get some venison, and they do it really well. And I think that that the model works there. The government have backed it. They are, they're making sure that they're using the surplus and the waste, and I think we've got a long way to go. I mean, I think this is even something that Mark Ruskell could back. But I'll leave it there and I'll move the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. The question is that Amendment 97 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 98 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Ready debated with Amendment 20. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 98 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 98 in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes 22, no 87. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 99 in the name of Edward Mountain. A ready debate with Amendment 1. Edward Mountain to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 99 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 99 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 100 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 1. Edward Mountain
moved.
Not moved. Moved. The question is that Amendment 100 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 100 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 101 in the name of Edward Mountain. Ready to debate with Amendment 1. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 101 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament has not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 101 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 102 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 1. Edward Mountain, move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 102 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 102 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 86, no 23. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 103 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with amendment 1. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 103 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 103 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 82. There are no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 104 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with amendment 1. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 104 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 104 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 24, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 105 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with amendment 1. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved, President.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 105 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 105 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 8 on authorisations. I call Amendment 106 in the name of Edward Mountain, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, and I call on Edward Mountain to move Amendment 106 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I have a mere 26 amendments to talk to here. The first one is what I call the reverse Bambi amendment. This is Amendments 106 and 107, which would change the law to regards lactating female deer and calves. What I'm trying to do here is to say that calves should not be shot and taken from their mother unless there is the intention to shoot the mother as well, because it is unfair on the mother to leave her in a situation where she is still lactating and subject to mastitis if you've shot the calf. Now, Amendment 108 deals with the issue of shooting deer with shotguns. I don't know, Minister, if you've ever done that, and I don't know how many people in this Parliament will have shot deer with shotguns. I have to say I have. It's not something that I would do generally and was ever very comfortable doing, because shooting deer with shotgun requires very heavy cartridges, loads of cartridges, and also requires a minimum of SSG, in my opinion, which is a shot size. Now, the problem is that if we are going to extend the use of shotguns, and I can see there may be an argument for it, but I'm very nervous about it, there should be very strict controls about it. If you're going to shoot deer with a shotgun, you should do it very close to you. And I believe that load size should not be below 36 grams. And there is no evidence that steel shot is suitable for shooting on deer. And I would also say that shooting a red deer with a shotgun, unless you're using a solid slug, is not something that I would do, and not something that I would feel is humane, which the Minister agreed that deer management plans would require to be. Amendment 110 would remove the requirement for mandatory training. Given there's no evidence that mandatory training will increase to an increased level of competence, because the sector has maintained a very high standard of training through self-regulation for many years. It is concerning that the policy and legislation being drafted under the guise of safeguarding deer welfare without actually a clear case for that. The Deer Working Group, I think, speculated that wounding rates might be between currently 6 to 17, between 6 and 17%, without providing any verified data. In fact, Forestry and Land Scotland, who shoot deer on our behalf, has no record of how many shots are taken to kill their deer, how many misses there are, and how many woundings there are. Maybe that should be information that should have been collected to allow Amendment 110 to allow mandatory training to go ahead. Amendments 111 and 112 exempt mandatory training from those who have possessed a firearm certificate continuously since 1975, and those that were born before the end of 1975, respectively. Now, the average age of a deer stalker at the moment, presiding officer, is between 58 and 59, meaning that these are effectively grandfather rights, which means that we are not going to go into the situation where you have maybe young people who've been qualified by reading the law and understanding the books, testing people who've been shooting deer for maybe 30 or 40 years to see whether they're competent. That, to me, I think is hugely demeaning of the incredible hard work that they put in. And the other amendment, 113, relating to this, exempts from mandatory training those who can provide a reference to prove they are fit and competent, and by that I mean have shot deer for a period of time. Amendments 114 to 120 oblige ministers to consult with various parties when making supplementary provisions pertaining to the fit and competent register and mandatory training. There are very serious concerns about firearms licensing and the fit and competent register under the Natural Environment Bill, especially implications for those who travel to Scotland from the rest of the UK. The Home Office has already noticed that the bill would require amendments to its firearms licensing guide, and these amendments therefore seek to consult on the various stakeholders UK-wide to ensure that new legislation relating to mandatory training and the fit and competent register would be brought into the attention of those granting firearms outside Scotland for those taking land in Scotland. It makes sense. Amendments 121, 122 and 123 oblige ministers to properly consult on mandatory training. Consultation and assessments must be taken on those carrying out deer management, funding, resources and the capacity and demand for training. Must also consider wounding rates, second shot placement and other welfare factors, as well as the financial impact on deer practitioners. A statement should be laid, I believe, before the Parliament, affirming that necessary conditions have been met for mandatory training to be introduced, and if they can't, it shouldn't be. Now, Amendment 124 obliges ministers to consult those with an interest in the regulations regarding international qualifications for deer management and how they fit into the enforcement of the fit and competent register. We make much in this Parliament, or this government does, about keeping pace with Europe. In Europe, they have tests like in Germany called the Jagdstein, which are clearly carried out annually and can be brought over to this country. And if somebody has proved they're fit and competent to shoot deer in Germany, should we not be considering that they're fit and competent to carry it out in this country? Amendment 125 would oblige ministers to publish a statement setting out the scientific evidence in support of the proposed regulations, an assessment of the training's availability and resources and the deer welfare. Amendment 126 obliges ministers to create a fund to meet some of the costs of deer management practitioners and what the costs they'll have to face due to the introduction of mandatory training. It's helping them along the route. Amendments 127, 128 and 129 are to remedy the bill's current undermining of basic safety aspects with respect to introducing concurrent sporting rights. Amendments 127 and 129 oblige the occupier of a holding to gain agreement from the owner of the sporting rights of the land prior to taking deer to prevent damage. Amendment 128 removes SNH's ability within the bill to decree that anyone is fit and competent, which I believe is a huge conflict of interest with the bill's other provisions regarding the fit and competent register. Amendment 130 removes section 131A, the right of occupier or grazing committee to prevent deer damage. I want to do that to ensure that everyone talks. Now, I want to talk briefly on Amendment 131, presiding officer. It's the last amendment in this group that I will address. Amendment 131 removes the section 32 and the liability for killing stray or farmed deer. Now, once a farmed deer has got out of its enclosure, it is feral. I don't believe anyone in this chamber would suggest that it was possible to catch it again and put it back into its enclosure. Once it's out there, it joins the wild population And I've seen that in Speyside when farm deer escaped from a deer park within Murray and now have spread right the way across the Lower Spey catchment. The only way you know whether they're farm deer, the old original ones that came out, and there's very few of those left, is if they've got a tag in their ear. Let me tell you, Presiding Officer, and if you try it, I suggest it's more difficult than you think, trying to identify a farm deer with a yellow tag with a thermal imager at night just ain't possible. So I think the issue of farm deer and the whole issue of this section makes a mockery of what we're trying to do. Once they're out, once they've joined the wild population, they're feral deer and they need to be controlled. I'll leave my comments at that, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. And I now call on Minister Jim Fairley to speak to Amendment 54 and other amendments of the Group. Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Excuse me. I will first of all speak to my amendments in this group. That's amendments 54 to 58 before I turn to Mr Mountain's amendments. My amendments seek to do two things. Firstly, they seek to provide some reassurance that I have listened to the concerns that have been raised at stage 2 about the potential safety risks of expanding the land on which occupiers can kill deer to prevent damage. And secondly, they seek to address the concerns about relationships between owners and occupiers. In Amendment 56, that will enable us to set out, via secondary legislation, further steps which must be taken before the rights under Section 26 can be exercised. I listened very carefully to what was said during the Stage 2 debate and the solutions that were proposed about notification. I do not at this stage think there is a solution to the safety concerns that can be found in notification, but I am committed to finding a solution that works. Importantly, one which enables tenants to take action where deer are a problem in a timious way. It is my intention that before the changes to Section 26 are brought into effect, that I will consult with those affected, and that is occupiers, landowners and sporting tenants, on options to address these safety concerns. As I've set out previously, NatureScot is already working on updates to the Deer Code, and Amendment 56 enables us to set out further guidance on Section 26 rights in that code. And it is my intention that the updated code will cover this, and it will address some of the other issues raised at Stage 2 around the relationship between occupiers and owners or sporting tenants generally. The key aim here is to find a way for us to work together and to enable occupiers to tackle damage that is occurring without the process becoming unnecessarily burdensome. I have also supported Ms Grant's amendment in the earlier group, which will enable occupiers, among others, to seek NatureScot intervention where damage is being caused by deer, so I would urge members across the Chamber to support my amendments. Turning to Amendments 106 and 107 in the name of Edward Mountain. I appreciate that there are a wide range of views on the best ways to manage deer in Scotland, and I understand that there are legitimate concerns with regards to deer welfare. Mr Mountain's amendments are well-intentioned, but I don't think it is appropriate for this to be placed in primary legislation. It is already best practice and therefore a requirement of a NatureScot authorisation to cull a calf first. If for any reason a calf is orphaned, it is a requirement that the calf is then culled also. It is intended that compliance with that kind of restriction would be a requirement to be considered competent to shoot deer under the new register also. Perhaps Mr Mountain would agree that that would be a fitting use of a register. For these reasons, I am asking the member not to press Amendments 106 and 107, and if he does press them, I would ask members to oppose them. Amendment 108 seeks to remove red deer from the species of a deer that could be shot with a shotgun where authorised by NatureScot. Shotguns are currently permitted to shoot all species of deer in Scotland, so long as they meet the specifications set out in the Firearms Order. The bill regulates the use of shotguns, meaning that shotguns can only be used to shoot deer under authorisation from NatureScot. One of the benefits of this is that we will gain a better understanding of who is using shotguns to shoot deer and in what circumstances. Now, I gave consideration to banning the use of shotguns to shoot deer outright, but on balance, I think that this authorisation process is best at this stage. Mr Mountain's amendment would unnecessarily constrain the flexibility of the authorisation regime, and we will keep the matter under review. But NatureScot will continue to consider what the circumstances and where it is appropriate for a shotgun to use and I'll take Mr Mountain's intervention.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for taking an intervention. My point on Amendment 108 is to remove red deer, because I just think they're too big to shoot with a shotgun. It's just not physically what I would have described when I was a soldier in active war. It'd be like taking on a tank with a rifle. It's just not physically possible. And the Amendment 109 gives the ability for SNH to signify that a certain type of ammunition, not steel shot, can be used, providing it's using 36 grams of powder. I don't think that restrains them. It gives them good guidelines. Does the Minister agree with that point?
Minister.
I've already stated the position in terms of the authorisations for a shotgun, and that's the position we had. But I've already said in my opening statement that that is potentially one of the things that can be looked at in guidance. But I would also point out there are exemptions in the 1998 Sixth Act for the prevention of suffering and protection of public safety. So if, for example, a deer is hit by a car and injured, because this was a point that Mr Mountain raised in a previous debate about this, and a farmer with a shotgun shoots it to end its suffering, then this would not require authorisation. And I think that's an important point to make. In Amendment 109, that also relates to the use of shotguns and inserts a new specification for ammunition used with authorised shotguns. Now, I've already set out that we will define shotguns in relation to this part of the bill via secondary legislation as well, because it's important to remember that ammunition weights and specifications for shooting deer are generally set out in the firearms order. So while I understand there may be concerns about steel alternatives, we can and we do update the firearms order as appropriate. And most recently that was updated in 2023 and it was agreed by Parliament. Most importantly, this was consulted on and was evidence-based. Unfortunately, Mr Mountain's amendment is not. And Amendment 110, regarding the Amendment 110, this was debated at stage 2, and quite frankly, this proposal is ludicrous. If passed, this would mean that we would be prevented from even requiring a baseline level of competence in deer stalkers in Scotland. Now, I know that we have got very many highly skilled stalkers right across the country, and this is not about undermining them. If anything, I want to recognise that skill further. I've set out that we will consult the sector on the proposals to bring this register into effect, and we will consider all the aspects of transitional arrangements, including the duration of any transition period, to ensure that the register works. However, I don't think it is a tenable position to stand here in the Chamber and raise issues around deer welfare and public safety, while at the same time opposing a baseline competence. It is for these reasons I would urge members to strongly oppose Amendment 110. I'm going to address Amendment Treble 1 through to 124 quickly, and I'm not going to enter a debate on each of them individually. I have set out now many times that the detail of the fit and competent register will be set out in secondary legislation, and that we will consult widely and fully on that. Mr Mountain's amendments include automatic competence for people over the age of 50, or for anyone else who has held a firearm for over 50 years. They may have held a firearm certificate for shooting birds and never shot a deer in their life. And I've held a shotgun licence, I've held a rifle licence for many years and never shot a deer. That does not make me a fit and competent person to shoot deer just because I've held a licence. At present, I think references are subjective, and they offer no consistent assurance of competence. It also does not guarantee knowledge of current best practice, welfare standards or safety requirements. I will look at all the issues that Mr Mountain has raised as part of the consultation process: access to training, appropriate training levels, arrangements for international stalkers and the international training standards. I'll look at cross-border stalkers, I will look at funding for training schemes, transitional arrangements and the appropriate transition periods and more. There is no question over whether this register is necessary, but I am absolutely committed to bringing it forward in a way that is not burdensome to deer managers and brings benefits for us all. So therefore, again, I strongly urge members to oppose Amendments 111 to 124. With regard to Amendment 125, requiring a statement to be made setting out the justification for our proposals to bring in mandatory training. The members should be aware that regulations under 17A will require to be accompanied by a policy memorandum which will set out the policy rationale, the evidence base and the justification for the proposals, and it will be subject to full parliamentary scrutiny. Therefore, requiring a statement in advance of any change is unnecessary. Amendment 126, while supporting access to training is important, it is not necessary to legislate for this, and it is much more preferable for us to consult with deer managers on what they need to access training than legislate for it now without the evidence. And Amendments 127 and 129 They would in effect make the rights afforded to occupiers under sections 26 and 26ZA of the 1996 Act defunct. The purpose behind sections 26 and 26ZA is to enable occupiers to address damage where they don't ordinarily have the right to do so. If they had permission from the holder of the sporting rights to shoot the deer, then they would have the right to do so, and section 26 would not be necessary. So the rights that are afforded here are about addressing damage quickly and addressing damage where agreement cannot be reached. We are going to set out further in guidance how occupiers, owners and holders of sporting rights should work together, but Edward Mountain's amendments are unworkable. Amendment 128 would remove the provision allowing occupiers to authorise individuals approved by Nature Scot as fit and competent to take or kill deer. It is fair that an occupier may not be able to shoot the deer themselves where the circumstances set out by Section 26 apply, and they may wish to have someone else carry out the deer management on their behalf. In these circumstances, they can authorise someone approved by Nature Scot as fit and competent to do so. That is not a general right to harvest deer. I urge members to oppose Amendment 128. Amendment 130, turning to Amendment 130, seeks to remove the changes we propose to make to Section 26 of the 1996 Act completely. That would completely undermine the aims and the objectives of the bill. We have debated this at stage 2. Section 26ZA will empower occupiers of agricultural land or woodland and grazing committees to act swiftly to prevent injury to livestock or to damage caused by deer, not only to crops and woodland but also to the natural heritage and environment. And I am not going to justify this any further, and I will ask members to oppose Amendment 130. Amendment 131 seeks to remove Section 32 from the bill so that changes to the 1996 Act relating to liability for taking or killing stray farm deer are not made. In particular, Section 32 introduces an offence of failing to report the taking or killing of a stray or farm deer and a defence to civil liability for taking or killing stray or farm deer. Our changes via the bill mean that if someone shoots a deer because it is causing damage, for example, then they are able to identify it as a stray farm deer after the fact. They must report the shooting to the police within 5 working days, or that will be committing an offence. If they report the killing of the stray farm deer, then no offence will have taken place. And further, it is a defence for the person to show that they did not know and could not reasonably have known that the deer was a stray farm deer. Where a person complies with a requirement to report any such killing, they will also have a defence in any civil proceedings brought against them. And this is all the bill is aiming to do, and that was the recommendation of the Deer Working Group. Therefore, I would urge members to oppose Amendment 131.
Thank you. I call on Edward Mountain to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 106. Mr. Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll keep that short because I don't suppose there's any point debating with somebody who decries your amendments as ludicrous and unworkable. I mean, they have actually been submitted because they're not ludicrous, because I think they're worthwhile debating and they're in the chamber. I would just make a couple of points, if I may, Presiding Officer. My experience is that those people who use firearms to shoot deer and mammals. They don't use firearms to shoot birds. That's mainly shotguns, which may be why there's some confusion in the Minister's mind over the difference between the two when it comes to killing deer and shot sizes. I would also just make the other issue, if I may, when it comes to farm deer and notifying it. It's a pity in my mind that the government being so keen on ensuring it happened. If I could just take the Minister back, if I may, to, I think it was 2018, when Scottish Land and Forestry went through a purge of killing sheep, where they killed 222. I find no record of them notifying the owners that they killed them. But what's good for sheep is one thing, what's good for farm deer is another. I'm going to leave it there because I don't think this is a debate that I'm going to win or is going to be engaged with properly. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
You're pressing the amendment, Mr. Mountain.
I press my amendment, Presiding
Thank you. Question is that Amendment 106 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 106 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 39, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 107 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 107 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 107 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 108 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move? The question is that Amendment 108 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 108 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 109 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 109 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. Result of the vote of Amendment 109 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 110 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move? Question is that Amendment 110 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 110 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 24, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 111 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 111 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. Point of order, Edward Mountain.
Presiding Officer, my machine didn't seem to want to connect. I would have voted yes.
I'll ensure that is recorded. Mr Mountain. And the result of the vote on Amendment 111 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 23, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 112 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Presiding Officer, I am going to move all of these amendments. Would it help in any shape to the Parliament to move them en bloc, or would that not be possible? Sorry, I'm trying to be helpful, not divisive, Presiding Officer.
I appreciate the intention there. I'm going to take advice and confirm.
Graham, I've tried.
Okay, let's give it a go. I therefore call amendments 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123, 124, 125 and 126. To move on block, Mr Mountain?
I will just move those ones on block, Presiding Officer.
Does any member object to a single question being put?
What ones?
Okay. Okay, we're going to take the next two individually, and then we'll come back to you, Mr Mountain, to move the others on block. So the question is that 112 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 112 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 24, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 113 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 113 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Sturgeon. I'll make sure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on Amendment 113 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 41, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. A single question we put. The question is that amendments 114 to 126 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, my app did not connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you. I will make sure that is recorded, Mr Lumsden. And the result of the vote on amendments 114 to 126 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 24, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendments are not agreed, therefore. Call Amendment 54 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 106. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 54 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. I've heard a no. If anybody is saying no, can they say it loudly? Amendment 54, are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 55 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 106. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Question is Amendment 55 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 127 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain, to move or not?
Moved.
Question is Amendment 127 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 127 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 80. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 128 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move on.
Moved.
Question is Amendment 128 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 128 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 81. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 129 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not move. Question is Amendment 129 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 129 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 56 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 106. Minister, move formally.
Moved, President.
Question is Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 57 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 106. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 58 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 106. Minister to move formally.
Moved, President.
Question is Amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 130 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106. Edward Mountain to move or not?
Moved.
Question is Amendment 130 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 130 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 131 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 106.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is Amendment 131 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 131 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 59 in the name of Beatrice Wishart. Already debated with Amendment 20. Beatrice Wishart, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. Call Amendment 132 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 97. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 132 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 132 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 24, no 85. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 133 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 97. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Move.
Question is that Amendment 133 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 133 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 47, no 61. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 134 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 97. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Yes. Yeah, moved.
Moved. Question is that Amendment 134 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. And the vote is closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 134 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 47, no 61. There were no abstentions. Therefore, the amendment is not agreed. Call Amendment 135 in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Already debated with Amendment 97. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 135 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 135 in the name of Rachel Hamilton is yes 50, no 56. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 136 in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with Amendment 20. Tim Eagle to move or not? Not moved. That is not moved. I call Amendment 137 in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with Amendment 20. Not moved. That is not moved. I call Amendment 138 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 20. Edward Mountain to move or not? Moved. Question is that Amendment 138 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 138 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 139 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 20. Edward Mountain to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 139 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 139 in the name of, 139 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 26, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 140 in the name of Tim Eagle, already debated with Amendment 20. Tim Eagle to move or not move? Question is that Amendment 140 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. No, that is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 140 in the name of Tim Eagle is yes 100, no 9. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. It takes us to Group 9, Introduction, Management and Protection of Native and Non-Native Species. I call Amendment 141 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Group with amendments as shown in the groupings. Mark Ruskell to move Amendment 141 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'm absolutely delighted to be moving Amendment 141, which will finally deliver swift bricks on new buildings in Scotland. Now, this is a bill that does some very big things for nature, including putting nature targets into law for the very first time. But it would be a wasted opportunity if we didn't use the bill to also make the simple changes that can help nature recover. Now, swifts are incredible. They visit our communities every summer and they treat us to their amazing aerial displays. And it's a joyful moment each year when they return from Africa, but that joy is tinged with sadness because this is a species that is in serious decline. We've lost nearly two-thirds of our swifts since the year 2000, and the reasons are varied. Climate change, loss of insect diet are serious factors. But perhaps the biggest reason they cannot thrive in healthy numbers is because simply they have lost so many nesting sites in our buildings. Modern building standards have brought benefits, but the system that is improving our homes has unintentionally squeezed out the space for swifts and many other small birds, and they are suffering. So a swift nest brick costing around £30 is such a simple solution to give nature a home. But despite there being an agreed British standard for swift bricks, they are still not required in new builds. But if Amendment 141 passes tonight, it will ensure that swift bricks are mandated in new builds in Scotland, and Scotland will be the first country in the UK to achieve that. Now, I moved an amendment at stage 2 on mandating swift bricks, and I'm very grateful for the cross-party support that I had to get that marker finally into the bill. The Section 33B that was established places a duty on Scottish ministers to make regulations requiring the installation of an average of one swift nest box per building. But following discussion with the Cabinet Secretary, I appreciate more fully the procedural concerns raised at the Stage 2 debate and have worked with her now on this Amendment 141. And I want to get this right, even if it takes a little longer for new building standards to be delivered. Amendment 141 replaces Section 33B to address these concerns, ensuring that provisions are introduced in a way that the statutory duties of the Building Scotland Act 2003 are fulfilled and that sufficient time is provided to enable the outcomes of statutory processes to inform and be fully incorporated into regulations and then the technical guidance that accompanies it. Now, this amendment provides assurance that action will be brought forward by the Scottish Government in a way that is suited to the purpose, role and conventions of the building standards system, while delivering the intent that was put forward by myself at stage 2 and supported by members in this Parliament. Now, I look forward to hearing more from the Cabinet Secretary about the Government's commitment to the action for swifts. I particularly like to hear confirmation that future consultations will focus on the average minimum of one brick per building, and that the consultation will also focus on the need for boxes that follow British standard guidelines. But lastly, Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank all the campaigners across these islands who are working on swift conservation, and particularly Hannah Bourne-Taylor, who's in the chamber tonight. She has inspired thousands of people, including myself, to take up the fight to save our swifts. And I hope tonight that we can get this over the line at Holyrood, set an important example for the rest of the UK, and give swifts a home for good.
Thank you. I now call Mercedes Vialbot to speak to Amendment 61 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by discussing some of the other amendments in this group, which are of particular note. We'll be supporting Mark Ruskell's Amendment 141 this evening. Swift nest boxes will be vital in restoring swift populations, and I'd like to thank Mark Ruskell for championing this issue and to the very many constituents who have contacted us all about this amendment. I'd also like to highlight our support for Beatrice Wishart's Amendment 159. I raised similar amendments at stage 2 because urgent action is needed to tackle invasive non-native species, and I'm pleased to see this brought back to stage 3. Moving to my Amendment 61, which seeks to end exemptions by ministerial order to the introductions of invasive and non-native species in the Wildlife and Natural Environment Act, where these exemptions are granted solely for commercial or economic reasons. I've brought this forward following my amendments 54, 55, 56 and 12 at stage 2, which sought to address and shine a light on the extent of environmental damage that's caused by invasive non-native species. In particular, my amendment 56 sought to address exemptions granted solely for economic or commercial purposes. Now, I didn't move that amendment at stage 2 because the Cabinet Secretary said she'd be prepared to work with me on redrafting for stage 3. To quote Ms Martin, If she considers not moving amendments 12, 54, 55 and 56, we can work on them ahead of stage 3. Unfortunately, despite meeting with the Cabinet Secretary ahead of stage 3 and raising this specific issue with her, work on this particular area didn't occur. I've therefore reworked Amendment 56 and brought it back today. At stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary raised concerns about the impact that this amendment could have on plantations of Sitka spruce. But let's be clear, that would only be the case if these plantations provided no environmental value whatsoever. And that's something that we simply cannot afford. We need these plantations to have a net positive impact, for example, by sequestering more carbon than they release from peatlands damaged by their conifer seed rain. This is a reasonable intervention for government to make. It's reasonable to require our forestry sector to do more than just make money. They are custodians of our land and must justify the use of invasive and non-native species beyond profit margins. Because if not, it's our land, our air, our water, our environment and our health that pay the price. If the Cabinet Secretary can't support this amendment, then it suggests that the Scottish Government is prepared to put private commercial profit above everything else, including our natural environment, rather than at least balancing it with our other concerns. So I'd like to ask her to consider this amendment carefully and to be clear that this bill cannot be used to greenwash destructive business practices. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Beatrice Wishart to speak to Amendment 159 and other amendments in the group.
Amendment 159 developed from my amendments at stage 2 on invasive non-native species. And they in turn were developed from discussions I had with the RSPB, and I thank them for their expertise and assistance. At stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary made arguments against those which this amendment seeks to address, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for meeting me to discuss the issue, though I realise she may still not be in favour of this amendment, but I would like to set out the background to how this has come about. Amendment 159 gives statutory footing to the Invasive Non-Native Action Plan for Scotland and makes it a condition of that plan that it tackles 3 of the most pressing specific invasive non-native species issues, or INS, facing Scotland: land access for controlling highly mobile INS, invasive seeding non-native conifers and better regulation of non-native game bird releases. Scotland's delicate island ecosystems are especially vulnerable to INS. The Orkney Native Wildlife Project, which is tackling stoats, is showing great promise in terms of benefits to wildlife. However, it faces a significant blockage in terms of access for surveillance and control. To bring down stoat numbers permanently, the project must be able to reach all the animals. Legal advice to Nature Scot confirms the inappropriateness of current legislation, species control orders in this situation. At stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary said that before a change in access legislation could be made, wider consultation would be required. The amendment proposed today seeks to ensure that such consultation is undertaken as quickly as possible by making this change a key element of a national INS plan with statutory footing. Invasion of non-native conifers in Scotland from plantations into sensitive habitats is a significant and growing INS pressure. Sitka spruce is the fastest spreading plant species in the country. Nature Scot analysis estimates that over 30% of Scotland's peatlands are at risk of colonisation. Native woodlands are also suffering seeding conifer invasion, and the cost of removing these conifers is already affecting conservation funding. The National INS Plan would signal the development and implementation of a coordinated national programme to manage this problem. The release of non-native game birds for hunting in Scotland, particularly when released in high densities, can threaten native species, damage habitats and risk disease transfer to wildlife. Shetland wildlife has been among the most severely affected by highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, in the whole of Europe. Red-legged partridges were released for the first time in Shetland last year. An environmental information request to DEFRA showed that no red-legged partridges were placed on the poultry register, a key mechanism for controlling HPA in Shetland. This is one example of a wider issue. Between autumn 2022 and autumn 2023, more than 31,000 non-native game birds either died of HPAI or were slaughtered at 7 infected game rearing premises across Scotland. All of these infected birds had open access to Scotland's natural environment, putting native species at risk. Since then, there have been multiple HPAI mass mortality events involving non-native game birds, including more than 500 pheasants found dead in Scotland's natural environment in August 2024, the standard sample all testing HPAI positive. This event was in the Borders, 40 miles from this Parliament. Importantly, this amendment does not seek to ban game bird releases. Rather, it seeks to utilise an INS action plan to investigate and build safeguards for instances where environmental damage or disease transfer from game bird release is likely. The environmental impacts of invasive species have increased sharply over the past century, and they continue to establish and spread. INS costs in Scotland are estimated at £500 million per year. This amendment seeks to ensure the sustained commitment that the intensifying INS challenge in Scotland demands. If the Cabinet Secretary is not minded to support this amendment, can I ask her to confirm the Scottish Government's commitment to addressing issues created by INS and what work it is doing on the 3 issues raised in my amendment? Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie to speak to Amendment 164 and other amendments in the group. Mr Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Amendments 164 and 165 are alternatives, which both include the same core provision. They amend Section 16 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981 to include specific reference to the purpose of falconry to kill or take mountain hares during a specified season beginning on the 1st of October and ending on the last day of February. The purpose of these changes is to offer legal certainty to those who have been granted licences to take mountain hares for the purpose of falconry, that they aren't committing an offence and that their activities, when in accordance with the terms of their licence, are not prohibited. Amendment 164 includes for the avoidance of doubt section, which could give even greater confidence to the falconers. However, in the response to concerns that this may introduce uncertainty into the legislation, given that other listed provisions do not have that clause, I have tabled 165 as an alternative option without this section. Barry Blyther has been a tenacious campaigner on this issue. Members will recall that at Stage 3 of the Animal and Wildlife Bill in 2020, the Parliament passed an amendment to give greater protection to mountain hares. The intention was sound, to curtail large-scale culls of the species, but it had a real impact on Barry and indeed many other falconers. We are talking about a small number of people who care for their birds of prey by allowing them to exercise their natural behaviour. But with the current law, falconers fear being on the wrong side of the law. Barry has campaigned extensively for almost 5 years for the oversight of the legislation process to be rectified, including through petition P1859, which gained almost 10,000 signatures. Barry has 2 golden eagles, both captive bred, aged 21 and 27. They have appeared in hundreds of hours of TV and film, from Winter Watch to Hostile Planet, both hunted hares with Chris Packham. Can a conservation activity be better represented by an eagle flying to the fist after a hunt for Chris Packham? The 2021 law effectively grounded both eagles. My amendments seek to change that. Now, I'm grateful to Murdo Fraser, who brought forward an amendment at Stage 2, which the Government rejected on the basis that it was too broad, covering species beyond mountain hares. My amendment responds to that criticism and limits the provision to this single species. At Barry's suggestion, they have included a specified season. In his years of experience, he's seen a change to the breeding season and wants to limit the licence period to make sure that it's in line with those changes. Under the current arrangements, Barry has been granted a limited licence to take up to 50 mountain hares per season by the method of falconry for the purposes of science, research, education and photography. However, the limited change that my amendment proposes would add clarity and certainty by adding falconry itself as a purpose. Let's put this in context. Since 2021, as a result of the law change by this Parliament, Nature Scot has issued 116 licences for the killing of almost 5,000 mountain hares. My amendment would increase that number by a tiny fraction, but would give golden eagles and others the freedom as nature intended. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call John Mason to speak to Amendment 166 and other amendments in the group. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much. And I bring forward this amendment concerning ptarmigan at the suggestion of the RSPB. The ptarmigan, Lagopus muta, is an iconic upland species that has undergone severe long-term declines in its breeding populations of more than 80% since the 1960s, according to the game bag data, resulting in its red list status on the Birds of Conservation Concern in 2021. This reduction in population correlates with a loss of range identified by the Bird Atlas 2007-11, largely driven by climate change and an erosion of the cold montane habitat they require and overgrazing. Despite red listing and the acknowledged pressures this species is under, the species remains on the quarry list, permissible to be hunted in the open season of August the 12th to December the 10th. The impact of hunting on this species is currently unknown, as bag returns are not required to be submitted to the relevant authority. However, for a species under such existing pressures, the precautionary principle should surely be applied, and the species should be removed from Schedule 2 until such time that hunting can be shown not to have a detrimental impact on the population. Given the severity of population declines, the sensitivity of the species to environmental change, and the principle that wildlife management should be grounded in conservation necessity rather than a historical sporting tradition, I would argue that removing ptarmigan from the quarry list is an essential and proportionate action. This, during the recognised biodiversity crisis, would help safeguard Scotland's fragile montane ecosystem and ensure management practices reflect modern ecological realities. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Tim Eagle to speak to Amendment 168 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My Amendment 168 seeks to establish a wildlife coexistence fund, a compensation fund for farmers and landowners who have been negatively impacted by the reintroduction of beavers and the expansion of sea eagles. As I argued at Stage 2, the return of beavers has brought acknowledged ecological benefits, but in many areas it has also created some problems. At the same time, the expanding population of white-tailed sea eagles has had a severe impact on livestock, with lambs being taken each year and crofters facing emotional and financial hardship. I do acknowledge that the Scottish Government do have a compensation scheme in place for sea eagles already, but from what I've heard from crofters, particularly in the Western Isles and on the west coast of Scotland, it's not doing enough. The Scottish Government have still not committed funding for this year, as I understand it, which has made it difficult for farmers to plan ahead of the lambing season. Farmers are effectively being asked to plan blind. I would ask the Parliament to support my Amendment 168 as an opportunity to help and support our land managers. And if I can quickly turn to 141 in the name of Mark Ruskell. I think Mark Ruskell has done some incredible work actually pulling together everybody behind this. You know, I've got a lot of nest boxes at home, insect hotels I think I made with the kids. These are all easy things we can do, and I wouldn't suggest we put all of these things into legislation, but I think there was a very clear requirement for us to look at Swift's Bricks, which is this cheap alternative. And he's mentioned Hannah already, but Hannah Bourne-Taylor I think is still up in the public gallery. I have never seen a champion work so hard. I think she's come up all the way from London today just to see this moment. So I hope we can all get behind that today. It isn't an easy task. I did half expect to see Gordon MacDonald dancing down the aisles as he's the species champion, but I don't even think he's in the room. But hopefully he's away doing that just now. But I commend 141 and Mark for that work and hope that we can get that passed today.
Thank you. I now call Rachel Hamilton to speak to Amendment 171 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll move swiftly on. My first My first amendment in this group relates to the protection of red squirrels and calls for a review every 2 years to assess the impact and effectiveness of current efforts to protect red squirrels. The review would also include those organisations who are in receipt of public funding. As I highlighted at stage 2, the population of grey squirrels, which is listed as one of the 100 worst invasive non-native species by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, is approaching 3 million. And the red population has fallen to around 287,000, with 75% of that reduction found in Scotland. Throughout the passage of the bill, I've been working with the Central Borders Red Squirrel Network, who aim to stop the decline of the red squirrel population across the borders. Their members do this on a voluntary basis. At stage 2, I lodged amendments which would require a review of the squirrel pox virus, establish a red squirrel awareness campaign and separate the invasive grey squirrel from plants in terms of non-native species specification. The Minister spoke against these amendments and described them as bureaucratic. The Minister went on to say that Scotland already invests heavily in red squirrel conservation and pointed to more than £1 million worth of funding from the Nature Restoration Fund. While I welcome the work that is already ongoing, my constituents, who are part of the Central Borders Red Squirrel Network, do not feel supported by those organisations and projects which are in receipt of government funding. I have been told that Saving Scotland's red squirrels, who received support from the Nature Restoration Fund, withdrew their support from the Borders formally in 23-24 and made the only full-time grey squirrel control officer in the Borders redundant. Therefore, the burden of protecting red squirrels in the Borders is falling completely on the tireless work of volunteers, and that's why my amendment seeks to assess the impact and effectiveness of the Government's current efforts to protect red squirrels. Turning to amendments 178, 179, 180, 181, 182, 183, 184 and 185. Before addressing my next set of amendments on grouse licensing, I wanted to take the opportunity to set out to the Minister and members across the Chamber why I am seeking to amend the licensing scheme for grouse smalls. Members will be likely aware from my involvement in the scrutiny of the Wildlife Management in Muirburn Act 2024 that grouse shooting is an extremely important land use in my constituency, delivering multiple socio-economic and environmental benefits in the most rural of areas. I'm fortunate to have regular opportunities to engage with landowners, land agents, gamekeepers and shepherds who play an active role in the management of these iconic moorland habits year-round. And it is from this engagement that I know of their concerns and unease surrounding amendments brought forward to the licensing scheme for grouse moors at stage 2 of this bill. And I know from discussions with the Scottish Government that the sector has engaged with representatives on this issue, namely and notably BASC and SLE, and I do welcome this engagement and thank the Minister for his willingness to engage. However, I also understand that ministers have not decided to bring forward amendments themselves to address these concerns, and that is why I'm seeking to do so with my amendments today. I do remain slightly confused after a meeting and some engagement that I had with the Minister on Thursday, because obviously there were time constraints and the Minister had not, in good faith, had time to consider the amendments because of other commitments. But I very much hope that members will consider these amendments in good faith, recognising that they intended to improve the workability and the effectiveness of the licensing scheme. This will, I hope, ensure the future sustainability of a sector which I know firsthand does a great deal when it comes to tackling biodiversity loss, mitigating the impacts of climate change and sustaining rural communities. Turning first to 178 and 181, my concerns lie at 16AA4C and the change in language from specify to describe through the stage 2 amendment by Mr Fairley. By describing the land to which the licence should relate, the applicant's ability to properly define the licensed area is weakened. It is important to remember that those applying for the licence to kill or take grouse will likely have the most intimate understanding about the land used and managed for the purposes of killing or taking grouse. The wording specify the area to which the licence is to relate, created by my amendments 178 and 181, establishes the practical assumption that the applicant's defined area would be a better starting point. The current wording, to describe the area of land to which the applicant proposes the licence should relate, casts doubt on this principle and makes the scope of the licence dependent largely on the Nature Scots approval. By replacing describe with specify, the effects are more apparent when combined with 16AA5A, another stage 2 amendment by Mr Fairley. This grants Nature Scot the power to propose a different area and refuse an application if an agreement is not reached about the area of land which is to be licensed. My amendments do not seek to remove this power, rather they seek to reflect, through more precise language, the fact that an applicant will better understand what land is used for and can thus specify with certainty and accuracy the land which should constitute the licensed area. This should be the logical starting point for future discussion, and I hope the Minister and members see why such a change is important. 179, 180 and 182 are technical amendments designed to ensure Nature Scot's functions are transparent and clear. 179 ensures that Nature Scot will only propose a different licence area if it considers it reasonable and appropriate to do so, and this underscores the importance of Nature Scot having good reason to make an alternative proposal. 180 simply clarifies that a proposal relating to a different licence area must be given to the applicant. And finally, Amendment 182 ensures that Nature Scot provide supporting reasons with any proposals concerning a different licensing area. And this will ensure an applicant fully understands for what reasons an alternative licence area is being proposed. I hope the Minister and members agree that these are logical amendments designed to ensure that there is clarity around Nature Scot's powers relating and relative to that licence area. Turning now to my final amendments, 183, 84, 85. These amendments relate to the most significant concerns of the sector. The Minister's Stage 2 amendments have eroded safeguards previously provided for within the Wildlife Management Muirburn Act. In the worst case scenario, the actions of an employer acting entirely of their own violation on land many miles away from the grouse moor and in contravention of explicitly expressed contractual obligations could give rise to the suspension or revocation of a licence. It is important to remember that suspension or revocation of a licence would almost certainly result in job losses, direct and indirect spending in the rural economy, as well as a cessation of moorland management, which we know delivers for biodiversity. The Minister's Stage 2 amendments effectively impose a form of strict liability on landowners for the actions of employees involved in the managing of land, and it is conceivable that this wide definition will bring about anyone with a tenuous link to managing that land, and this could include contractors over which the licence holder may not have control. This means that the actions of an unconnected third party over whom the licence holder has no direct control on the grouse moor to fulfil a contract could result in the loss of a grouse licence. And just briefly, even the commissioning of a relevant offence by a seasonal employee, like a beater or an agricultural tenant who might be in dispute with the landlord...
The member is just about to conclude.
...could, under the terms of the Minister's Stage 2 amendment, see a licence suspended or revoked, and this is unfair and unworkable. I will leave it there because I know I've taken enough time and I'm getting looks, but I think just finally, Amendment 185 is a technical amendment which seeks to clarify that only offences which directly support or benefit grouse shooting can elicit a licensing sanction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Jamie Harcourt-Johnson to speak to Amendment 177 and other amendments in the group. Mr Harcourt-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just remind the Chamber of my register of interest, a partner in a farming business, a member of NFU and of SLE. Presiding Officer, Amendment 177 in my name recognises that successful conservation brings management responsibilities. In parts of Scotland, particularly the islands and remote areas that I represent, goose populations are causing significant damage to agricultural land, especially that grazing used for livestock, and has been for some time. Farmers and land managers are already expected to deal with this under existing wildlife law. But in practice, controlling goose numbers is time-consuming, costly and often controversial, with the burden falling almost entirely on individual businesses, and that causes a great deal of frustration, particularly for farmers in my area, where they see the amount of resources spent on the state eradication scheme, but not so much spent on their issues around geese. This amendment does not change the protected status of geese and does not weaken licensing. It simply gives ministers the power to support and fund coordinated goose management, treating it as a public good activity rather than leaving individual farmers to bear the cost alone. That's proportionate and a practical response to an unintended pressure, and I urge members to support the amendment.
Thank you. I call Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin to speak to Amendment 45 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much. Can I start by talking about Amendment 141 in the name of Mark Ruskell? I fully support his intention to help address the decline in SWIFT numbers, and I'm very pleased to be able to support this amendment, and it's good to hear so many people have been convinced of the need to do it. Obviously, at stage 2, we had a slight disagreement on some of the technical issues, but I'm glad we've been able to iron those out. These iconic species, once a very common sight across Scotland, particularly in our urban areas, but of course, as Mark Ruskell has mentioned, they are under threat with a decline of over 60% since 1995. Which has led to them being on the red list of birds of conservation concern. So I welcome suggestions of practical ways that we can help protect this important species and improve our biodiversity. As I said, we weren't able to support the introduction of Section 33B, Stage 2, due to some procedural and technical concerns. But Mark Ruskell and I have collaborated since December to address these issues. By amending Section 33B, the provision is now better aligned with the purpose, role and established conventions of the building standards system in Scotland. And today's amendment provides assurance that the Scottish Government will take forward action, will consult on future measures to introduce a requirement for the installation of SWIFT nest boxes in new buildings, with reference to best practice guidance, including British Standard 42021-2022, where it's reasonably practical and appropriate to do so. This represents a more suitable approach to regulation, and we fully support the amendment and will encourage all members to do so as well. Amendment 45 that I've lodged is a minor technical amendment. It adds the words "to make certain other miscellaneous provisions relating to environmental matters" to the long title of the bill to reflect new topics that were added to the bill by amendment at stage 2, and I hope all members will support that. Amendment 61 by Mercedes Villalba aims to remove the ability to exempt non-native species from the invasive species offences under Section 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, where the sole purpose of the order is for economic or commercial reasons. And I agree that we should seek to ensure that where we allow non-native species to be utilised in Scotland, there should be multiple benefits, not just one. And it's for that reason I believe that this amendment is not required, as it is, I understand, it's primarily targeting non-native tree species. Non-native tree species already provide multiple benefits beyond being an important timber crop. It's not true to say that it's only their economic worth as timber product that's important, and I would reject that claim, because their ability to quickly sequester carbon, reduce erosion and flooding are just a few other benefits that could be used to justify their exemption, and it's therefore my view this amendment is redundant. And I also think it's a bit of a shame that Ms Villalba has claimed that I didn't work with her on this issue, because I'd like to highlight that Ms Villalba's Amendment 40 in Group 18, which will be debated later, both myself and Ms Goujon worked with Ms Villalba on that amendment, which will allow better regulation of the spread of invasive species in a forestry context. I'll take an intervention.
Mercedes Villalba.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. She does seem to be mixing herself up with her colleague, because she's absolutely right to say that I met with Ms Goujon to discuss amendments that I brought forward at stage 2 in relation to part 4, and that I have worked with her on, and that I have brought back in the form of Amendment 40. But Ms Martin is a completely distinct individual who, as I quoted, made very clear that she would be willing to meet with me specifically on Amendment 56, and that is what Amendment 61 is about bringing back. Now, I take on board what she's saying about disputing a claim. The amendment is not about a claim. The amendment is to ensure exactly what she's saying, which is that
these industries these exemptions for invasive non-native species will not be made solely for economic or commercial reasons. That's what the amendment's about. It's not saying that that is happening. It's about making sure that it doesn't happen. And if the Minister supports the principle, and given what she said at stage 2, I don't understand why she has avoided meeting with me on this particular issue to bring forward a revision at stage 3.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can assure the Chamber I'm not having an identity crisis. I'm flattered, actually, that I've been mixed up, even in my own head, with Ms Gouchon, who's substantially younger than me. I'd ask that Ms Fialba does not press this amendment. I reject her characterisation of the meeting. I was in the same room, we were having the same discussion. We are indeed the same team. So we were able to come up with an Amendment 40 in the group, even though that is Ms Gouchon that will be speaking to that. As you can see, 3 ministers are sat here all working together. If I can go to Amendment 159 from Beatrice Wishart. Amendment 159 seeks to place a requirement on ministers to produce a statutory invasive non-native species action plan. However, we're already in the middle of developing an invasive non-native, I'll just say INS from now on, shall I, save time, INS plan, and we've worked closely with stakeholders on that plan. I was clear when these matters were discussed at committee, but I'm committed to delivering effective action to address INS in collaboration with stakeholders. So I don't consider that it's necessary to put everything into primary legislation, because I think that doing so would create an unnecessary additional administrative burden without delivering any meaningful additional benefits and risks delaying, crucially, publication of the INS plan and losing much of the momentum we build around the work. Also, given that there's an election in May, it's not practical to draft a plan that's required by the amendment, which covers all the elements set out, to undertake a full public consultation and respond to this and publish it within the 12-month period specified. I've also mentioned previously Environmental Standards Scotland are currently investigating a number of aspects relating to INS, including some of the things that this amendment proposes our plan should cover, and I'm keen to hear the outcomes of that before deciding the next steps. And I believe that that's a prudent approach. I don't want to directly cut across that important work. And I had a good discussion with Beatrice Wishart about that a couple of weeks ago. But I'm very conscious of the strength of feeling on invasive non-native species. I welcome the engagement I've had. I'm committed to taking the necessary action, but not before we have heard the views and the results from ESS, who are carrying out that wide-ranging review into the issue. They're taking evidence from delivery bodies, stakeholders, and once we've got the outcome of those investigations, we'll be informed about what is needed. And I'm happy to give a commitment today that I will review the recommendations of the ESS work on INS and work with stakeholders in their INS action plan as timely as possible. Given everything set out here, I can't support this amendment today, but I hope that Ms Wishart feels that she's got, she understands that the government is doing work on this and we want it to be as well informed as possible. I will now hand over to Mr Fairley for the rest of the amendments. Presiding Officer.
Minister, Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'm going to start off with the amendments 164 and 165 from Willie Rennie. And that would allow falconers to hunt mountain hares, but only under licence granted by NatureScot outside of the breeding season. Now, this issue has been subject to extensive scrutiny over a number of years now, including detailed consideration by the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee, alongside sustained engagement with stakeholders involved, as clearly outlined by Willie Rennie in his contribution. And I fully recognise the strength of feeling on both sides of this debate. The decision taken in 2020 to protect mountain hare from indiscriminate culling was necessary and it remains important. However, Amendment 165 provides for hunting only under tightly controlled licensing issued by NatureScot, and the number of mountain hare likely to be taken under any such licence would be limited and insignificant. So on that basis, I am content to support Amendment 165, and I would encourage members to do the same. However, the additional provision contained in Amendment 164 is unnecessary, and I would ask the member not to press that amendment. And John Mason's Amendment 166 proposes to remove ptarmigan from Schedule 2, which would have the effect of ending the open season and prohibiting them from being hunted except under licence. Now, I recognise the members' concerns regarding ptarmigan. He has written to me a number of times, and the declines in their population. However, we are currently working jointly with other UK administrations on a comprehensive consultation examining all the Schedule 2 species where population pressures are of concern. We are on track to publish this consultation alongside our proposed approach in March of this year, enabling stakeholders to submit their views and ensuring that the implications of any changes to Schedule 2 are fully and properly considered before implementation. So I hope that reassures the member that this is being actively taken forward just now, so I therefore ask him not to press the amendment, and should it be pressed, I'd ask members not to support it. An Amendment 168 from Tim Eagle. The Scottish Government already provides targeted and effective support for land managers affected by species introductions through well-established mechanisms, including the Sea Eagle Management Scheme and the Beaver Mitigation Scheme, both delivered by NatureScot. These schemes provide practical assistance and financial support where the impacts are evident. And crucially, these existing arrangements address real and identifiable impacts without creating blanket statutory entitlement, while allowing NatureScot the flexibility to respond quickly, proportionately and on a case-by-case basis. So I'd ask the member not to press his amendment or oppose it if he does. On Amendment 171, the current red squirrel conservation strategies are evidence-led and adaptive. Introducing a statutory review would create unnecessary costs and divert limited resources away from practical conservation work, which I'm sure none of us want to see. The focus should therefore be on strengthening and delivering the existing programmes rather than imposing redundant statutory obligations. So for these reasons, I would urge members to oppose Amendment 171 and ask Rachel Hamilton actually not to press it. On Amendment 177 from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, I absolutely recognise the concerns raised about goose populations causing damage. However, comprehensive goose management schemes are already in place, covering both highly protected species and those whose numbers require control. I am, of course, very happy to meet with the member to hear any more suggested improvements to the schemes that he has. But I also note that I meet regularly with stakeholders, including the NFUS, through the Wildlife Management Forum that I established to discuss the tensions and to identify practical solutions between land management objectives and the management of certain wildlife species. Further to this, the Scottish Government already invests significant public funding in goose management, with approximately £1 million allocated annually to support these schemes. Primary legislation is therefore not required to achieve the objectives of Amendment 177, because effective mechanisms are already operating through the existing goose management arrangements. Introducing this amendment would reduce operational flexibility and it would increase bureaucracy, binding management to rigid legislative requirements rather than allowing schemes to adapt pragmatically to changing conditions on the ground. So I'd ask the member not to move that one. Amendments 178 to 185 propose a series of changes to legislation governing the grouse shooting licensing scheme. Amendments 179, 180 and 182 seek to prescribe procedural requirements that are already implicit in NatureScot's role as a public authority and add in wording that isn't strictly necessary. However, including these in legislation may provide the additional clarity to applicants, so therefore I'm happy to support them, and I encourage members to support them as well. Amendments 178 and 181 risk reopening vulnerabilities that the Government explicitly closed through the Stage 2 amendment, which was introduced to remove the potential loopholes and to strengthen the enforceability of the scheme. Amendments 183, 184 and 185 would narrow the circumstances in which grouse shooting licence could be suspended or revoked by the licensing authority. In doing so, these amendments would then undermine the Government's Stage 2 amendment by reintroducing the gaps that could be exploited to avoid accountability. These changes risk weakening the scheme's effectiveness by narrowing the circumstances in which a licence may be suspended or revoked. It is recognised that some landowners are concerned about highly exceptional or edge case scenarios. However, these concerns do not reflect how the scheme will operate in practice. NatureScot already exercises discretion, considering factors such as intent, foreseeability, the adequacy of management systems and the proportionality before taking any licence action. In relation to the suspension of a grouse licence, Nature Scott still have discretion over whether to suspend or revoke the licence, even if they are satisfied that a relevant offence has been committed. This enables Nature Scott to assess cases on their merits. So for these reasons, I would encourage members to oppose Amendments 178, 181, 183, 184 and 185. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was going to rise to speak very briefly in support of Amendments 164 and 165 in the name of Willie Rennie, and delighted to hear the Minister saying he will now encourage support for Amendment 165. As Willie Rennie pointed out, this was an issue I raised at Stage 2, and I accept the amendment I put forward at Stage 2 was deemed too broadly worded by the Government. However, Willie Rennie's brought back a more tightly worded amendment, which I hope the Chamber will support. This all dates back to the Animal and Wildlife Bill, when I think it was you, Presiding Officer, brought forward an amendment at Stage 3 to protect mountain hares. And that was done, if you'll forgive me saying so, at short notice. There was not time for it to be properly consulted or to allow the question of unintended consequences to be properly considered. And had that been allowed, one unintended consequence that would have been explored and exposed was the impact on falconers, of whom we have very few in Scotland. And that impact was illustrated by my constituent Barry Blyther of Elite Falconry in Fife. He took this all the way through the Public Petitions Committee, as Willie Rennie referenced, who very much supported the petition that he took. Indeed, members might recall a photo call in the garden when my colleague, the convener of the committee, Jackson Carlaw, had to be photographed several inches away from a very large and aggressive-looking golden eagle called Stanley. And the look of sheer terror on the face of Jackson Carlaw was well worth viewing just for that experience. Now, he fortunately survived that experience, as did Stanley the golden eagle. But Stanley was a very sad golden eagle because he was not able to fly over the moorlands of Scotland because of the risk he might swoop down and pick up a mountain hare, which would have led potentially to his keeper being charged with a criminal offence. So, Minister, if this amendment is carried, you'll have made Stanley a very happy golden eagle. So I encourage members to join with the Minister and I and Willie Rennie and make Stanley happy and vote for Amendment 165. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. I call Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Just calling it Stanley didn't make it any easier for the bird. But anyway, Amendment 171. Generally, I'm not supportive in principle of embedding mandatory reporting in primary legislation. And I think that could be a matter for committees, MSPs to follow with PQs, and indeed, in this instance, Nature Scott. However, I think that Rachel Hamilton raises very important points. I'm interested also in the distribution and efficacy of funding. Currently referred in the main to SSRS Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, but just like Rachel Hamilton, there's a group in my part of the borders, not Central Borders, but called the Red Squirrel Forum for the South of Scotland. I think they're in much the same position as Ms Hamilton's, in that they comprise mainly of volunteers, 17 groups, but I'm not very sure how they're operating within the ambit of the SSRS. So the questions that my colleague in the Borders raised are reflected in the questions raised with me, and it might interest the Chamber, heaven knows at this late night, that there are actually 1,000 red squirrels were spotted last year, even just in Tweeddale, so they're not just in the Highlands. So I'm interested very much in the relationship and the funding between SSRS and these other little organisations of volunteers, and how that funding is tracked to see how effective it is. I do not think, however, it's a place for a government or legislation. What I do think it is, it's a matter for Nature Scott, which disburses quite a bit of that funding, to audit, track and see where the money is going. And so I can't support the amendment, but I very much support the sentiments within it.
Thank you, Ms Graham. And I call on Mark Ruskell to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 141.
I'm tempted, Presiding Officer, but given the hour, I think I'm just going to move straight to the vote, and I'll press Amendment 141.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. The question is that Amendment 141 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is agreed. Therefore, we move to Group 10, Marine Planning and Fishing. And I call Amendment 142 in the name of Sarah Boyack, grouped with Amendments 34, 21, 143, 144, 145, 146, 147, 160 and 170. Sarah Boyack to move Amendment 142 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Apologies, I have been in for some time. I forgot to put the card back in. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 142 in my name, and I have 5 amendments in this grouping, and given the timings we are at tonight, I will focus on my amendments, but I do wish to say I do strongly support the amendment from Maurice Golden, which I shall be supporting later on. I shall let him speak to it. I want to thank the MCS, SIFT and Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation. They have been incredibly helpful in pulling my amendment 142 and getting it in front of you tonight. That amendment would amend the Marine Scotland Act so that the National Marine Plan, or as the case may be, a regional marine plan, is required to contribute to the delivery of any relevant nature recovery targets that will be set following the passage of this bill. And it would ensure that future National Marine Plan includes policies which actively drive recovery of marine biodiversity. There is an ongoing debate about the role and shape of marine planning, and we did see this debated and discussed during Stage 2. This amendment is therefore, I believe, an important opportunity to explicitly link the National Marine Plan with nature recovery targets, and that would help embed nature recovery as a core objective of marine planning. And my Amendment 143 would update the definition of marine environmental purposes in Section 2 of the Inshore Fishing Act 1984. And this amendment follows on Amendment 328, which was agreed at Stage 2, which added wording around climate adaptation to the Marine Scotland Act. And I was very pleased that the Government was able to support that amendment. And I do hope they can take a constructive and positive approach to Amendment 143. Currently, the definition in the 1984 Act speaks about conserving the natural beauty of marine or coastal areas, or conserving flora and fauna, which are dependent on marine or coastal environments. But given how we now understand the role that the marine environment can play in tackling climate change, for example through carbon absorption, we believe this definition needs to be updated to reflect this, and that's what this amendment does. Now, there are 3 key issues that 143 would deliver: mitigation of climate change, adaptation to climate change, and supporting ecosystem recovery in relation to these existing powers. So I think it updates those powers and brings them to the discussion that we now need to have. So I think there are issues that we need to really focus on. Now, one thing I need to talk about is just how much more we need to do. Amendments 144 and 145 were crafted with the real-world experience of the Scottish Inshore Fisheries Trust and the Scottish Creel Fishing Federation. And I brought these amendments forward again because I do want to ensure that the Scottish Government has real plans to make these changes. And if these amendments were agreed, they could make Scotland a true leader. And at the very least, I wanted to get these issues properly on the record today. Amendment 144 gives ministers the powers to bring in low-impact fishing priority areas, in line with Scottish ministers' commitments to support a just transition to a more sustainable industry. And I've worked closely with the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation on it. It truly is a modest proposal, one which would require any such areas to be subject to extensive consultation and could only be done to help meet any targets set under the bill, to fulfil the National Marine Plan, or to help achieve ministers' legal duty to deliver good environmental status. Amendment 145 would give ministers the power to protect those parts of our sea lochs which are most important as marine carbon stores. These lochs make a really significant contribution to Scotland's climate mitigation efforts, burying more carbon than the whole of the North Sea and storing more hectare than peatland. I was genuinely shocked when I saw those statistics, so let's hope it focuses minds. Amendment 146 would see the delivery of a Scottish marine strategy. Now, I did have a constructive conversation with the Cabinet Secretary, who's now back in the room, and I spoke with a whole series of stakeholders after the meeting I had with her and her officials. And they do not agree that we should rely on the UK Marine Strategy Regulations of 2010. So I just want to flag the sheer frustration that came across in the meetings I had after the discussion. The frustration was really well set out in the Open Seas joint briefing that I hope all members have had time to read. Frustration. Inshore marine protected areas and priority marine features consultation delayed. National Marine Plan 2 delayed. Inshore Fisheries Management Improvement Programme delayed. 21 fishery management plans delayed. Biodiversity strategy not delivered. Proposed Fisheries Management Bill never introduced. Penalties review launch date unclear. And good environmental states for Scottish seas targets missed in 2020 and 2024. So there's a lot of frustration out in the sector, and I really wanted to get that in the chamber today because I think we need to try and work together. The UK is yet to fully develop a marine strategy, and Scotland is responsible for more than half of the UK's seas. So we really have a responsibility to maintain good conditions, and a strategy would require action. So having looked into this issue in depth, I believe that the current mechanisms of auditing by the Office for Environmental Protection in England and Northern Ireland and the Environmental Standards Scotland don't fully replace the previous auditing by the European Commission. A strategy requires appropriate indicators. It requires monitoring to detect trends in these indicators. And there are three components of marine ecosystems that need monitoring: mobile animals, including fish and seabirds, the biotic communities of the seabed, and the plankton and water column. So, in my view, current monitoring is both inadequate and underfunded in Scottish waters, especially given the great extent of the west of Scotland of the Scottish inshore zone. So, I truly hope colleagues will consider supporting my amendments tonight. And if not, I hope that by getting these issues on the agenda tonight, by actually putting forward the really big concerns that key stakeholders have put to all of us, I hope the Scottish Government will be constructive, that they will listen and they will act on views from stakeholders. As ever, my preference is that all of my amendments will be accepted. But we know in terms of today's debate that does not always happen. So it's on the record. Please, let's get moving on this, because there is so much we can do, even in terms of job creation. There are lots of opportunities here. Let's not miss it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. And I call Emma Harper to speak to Amendment 34 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 34 relates to the conservation of wild salmon populations, which, as I have previously noted, are at a crisis point across their native range and are now considered to be an endangered species. And I want to thank Alan Wells of Fisheries Management Scotland for his education, his support, the advice with the amendments that I presented at stage 2. And I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary and her officials for support and assistance ahead of these amendments that I have at stage 3. The motivation behind this amendment is to increase financial penalties for the most serious offences against salmon on summary conviction to either the statutory maximum £10,000 or £40,000 for the most damaging activities, bringing offences in line with other wildlife crime and enabling certain financial penalties to be issued on a per-fish basis. The amendment would also allow for penalties to be determined on a per-fish basis where an offence results in the taking and or harming of of more than one fish. As I noted at stage 2, the most recent wildlife crime statistics show that fish poaching was the most common category of wildlife crime, but with the lowest level of fines. On average, fines by category ranged from £349 for fish poaching to £2,813 for offences against badgers. The amendment does not introduce new offences, but focuses on financial penalties for activities that result in the harming of wild salmon and their habitat. I agreed at stage 2 to withdraw my original amendments to take time to discuss with the Cabinet Secretary the effect of the amendments across all rivers in Scotland. As we heard at stage 2, offences against salmon sit across a number of pieces of legislation covering the River Tweed and the River Esk in the Borders and the rest of Scotland respectively. The amendment applies to the 2003 Act, which covers all rivers in Scotland except the River Tweed and the Upper River Esk. It is vital that we take the opportunity to amend the 2003 Act now, whilst the Government then works to address the situation with the Tweed and the Esk, which requires working with the UK Government to align penalties across all rivers in Scotland to avoid disparities. I have discussed this with the Cabinet Secretary, and again I thank her for meeting me about that, who has committed that this Government will work with the UK Government to request the necessary amendments to other relevant legislation. We also discussed a couple of technical issues with the withdrawn amendments, which have now been resolved. The commencement provisions in this bill allow for this amendment to be brought into force once arrangements have been made for the River Tweed and the River Esk to avoid disparities across Scotland's rivers. I know that the Government is working with partners under the Scottish Wild Salmon Strategy to ensure the protection and recovery of this iconic species, which is welcome. This amendment and uplift of financial penalties for salmon poaching offences and offences related to salmon conservation bolsters work already being done in this crucial area and reflects the conservation importance of wild salmon. So I move my amendment number 34 and ask members to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. Call Maurice Golden to speak to amendment number 21 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank Sarah Boyack for her support in this amendment, as well as the constructive engagement, not just on this amendment, but on the bill more generally, with Mary Goujon and Gillian Martin. Scottish fisheries are vital to our local communities and our economy, ensuring that they are appropriately regulated and that, in turn, regulations are compiled with underpins sustainable harvesting of stocks and helps to secure the health of the marine environment for generations to come. Fisheries penalties are a key part of the overarching fisheries management and enforcement approach, and they must be effective in order to properly drive compliance. Undertaking a review of fisheries penalties is sensible and timely and will help ensure that we have the best approach in place. Acknowledging that a review is complex and requires engagement with industry and others, a 2-year timescale is proposed for the review, from the point the relevant part of the Act is commenced. My amendment also provides the Scottish Government with relevant powers to propose and enact changes arising from the review, and I ask members to support Amendment 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden, and I call Douglas Ross to speak to Amendment 147 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I brought this amendment back to stage 3 because I do think it deserves further consideration in this chamber. And just by way of background, for well over 30 years, I believe this country has been very well served by skilled crew operating aircraft patrolling our marine environment. Now, a decision was taken by the Marine Directorate and the Scottish Government, almost certainly on financial grounds, to no longer use aircraft and move instead to 3 ageing vessels and using drones from them to do the same job. And they simply can't. And that's my view. And I would like to see these aircraft brought back into service. But that's not what my amendment... I will give way in a moment. That's not what my amendment seeks to do. I think that would be a step too far in primary legislation, as we've just heard in earlier groups from Christine Graham. All I am seeking to do with this amendment is to get a review from the Scottish Government into their decision. Now, at stage 2, the Cabinet Secretary suggested there is ongoing reviews and there is ongoing discussion and consultation on these issues. But if that was the case, I wouldn't have been contacted by many people who have operated these aircraft in the past and some who did it until very recently, deeply unhappy about the decision that was taken and the loss of capability we have suffered as a country. But I'll give way to the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I appreciate Douglas Ross giving me on that point. I just think it's important, and would he appreciate the point of clarity. He mentioned that we're instead relying on 3 vessels and drone technology, which isn't the case, and I think I outlined at the committee as well, because we do still have the same capabilities as what we had previously, again, at a fraction of the cost, and I think it is really important that we get that on the record.
Douglas Ross.
Well, no, I wholeheartedly, but with respect, disagree with that. If we had the same capability, we wouldn't have an issue that I'm about to articulate. The aircraft, as I say, with highly skilled, committed and dedicated crew, were very quick to respond, very agile, and could get out over the water in minutes or hours, and can be capturing images to take enforcement action. And crucially, a major part of their role was a deterrent. The fact that vessels knew they could be up in the air very quickly on top of them doing that surveillance acted as a deterrent. The replacement 3 vessels and the drones that can fly off them can sometimes be hundreds of miles away, not just hours away, but days away. And one of the submissions I received was that if someone is trawling in a closed box, they can know where the enforcement vessels are and know that they can get in and out of that box before there could be any surveillance done, any evidence captured, and therefore any enforcement taken. And I think that is a loss of capability. So I'm sorry, I disagree with the Cabinet Secretary on that point. Now, Amendment 147 Part 2, sections D and E, look at the gaps in capacity that the decision to move from the aircraft to the vessels has delivered. And I think there is a clear gap in capacity. But also what this amendment seeks to do in Part E is to have a review on the impact that this decision will have on the control and the protection of Scotland's water. I believe there was support for this amendment at stage 2 from the Labour Party. The Green Party abstained. They were not opposed to it because at the same time we were looking at this amendment, Ross Greer had brought forward amendments looking for tougher enforcement and punishments. And those amendments were very credible. But if we don't have an organisation and a group to do the surveillance, to do the evidence gathering, and crucially to do the deterrent, these penalties will mean nothing if we can't catch the culprits. But part of the review that I would like the Cabinet Secretary and the Government to agree to would look at how much evidence has been collected prior to the decision to ground the 2 aircraft and post that decision. Are we getting the same quantity and quality of evidence from these vessels as we got from the aircraft? Now, I presume the answer is yes, in the Government's view, because the Cabinet Secretary told me in an intervention just a minute ago that there's been no loss in capability. I believe there has been a loss in capability, but we would know if the review is allowed, if the Government accept that a review can happen, they will be able to provide the evidence that they have, that there has been no loss in capability in gathering effective evidence. What about the quality of that evidence? Is the Cabinet Secretary aware of incidents that could have been surveilled and captured by the aircraft that has been lost or has been missed by the vessels? How many convictions have we had pre the decision by the Marine Directorate and the Scottish Government to ground these aircraft and post that decision? Are we convicting the same numbers, more or less? That's really all I'm asking for here, Presiding Officer, for the Government to back up their case. And I understand it was probably almost certainly made on financial grounds, but we've got to look at the impact of these decisions. And as I mentioned at the committee, this is a decision that was taken with almost no consultation. And the fact that, some time later, there are still people in the Highlands who have been closely involved in this for many years, who are seeking answers from their government about this decision, shows that this could have been handled very differently and, I believe, much better. But that's in the past. We can't change that now. I hope the government learn from this in the future. And if a similar decision on this scale were to be taken again, they would fully consult and engage with those affected and those with the specialist information we should be trying to hold on to. Because make no doubt, we have lost as a result of this in the Highlands, not just by the aircraft not being used, and they're still sat, I believe, at Inverness Airport. They've not been bought yet. There is a very high price tag on them, but that has not been paid by anyone so far. But we've also lost people who were based in the Highlands with great skill and great knowledge, but without any alternative role in that area, they've had to move away. So not only have we lost an asset, we have lost people as well. But I conclude just by saying I don't understand the government's opposition to this. I am not calling for them to reverse the decision. Indeed, I am simply calling for them to justify the decision. And a review would do that. If this government are happy with the choice that they made, that there has been no loss in capability, we've not lost evidence, we've not seen a reduction in convictions or enforcement of punishments that are deserved to those who are infringing our marine laws, then they should have no worries at all about a review and supporting this amendment. Let's remember, this is a protection for the 5th largest exclusive economic zone in the world. The 5th largest in the world. It was previously done by 2 aircraft. It's now been done by 3 vessels. In my view, it's not been done as well as it could or it should be. But let's have the facts to make an informed choice going forward. Let's back a review as called for in Amendment 147, and the government can justify their decision or can accept, as I think they probably would in the cold light today, that this was the wrong call and perhaps we should reinstate the aircraft with the skilled crew to ensure we can protect our marine environment as we had all envisaged. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I call Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 160 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And again, I'd just like to remind members of my register of interest, which I declared at the beginning, that I have an interest in a wild salmon fishery. I have one amendment in this group, which is to do with wild salmon. It's Amendment 160, and it obliges ministers to prepare and publish a report on the progress made regarding the Scottish wild salmon strategy. I think the Scottish wild salmon strategy is a step forward by the Cabinet Secretary, and I welcome its introduction. But my amendment seeks to ask the Cabinet Secretary of the time to produce a report within 12 months of the bill gaining royal assent, and then for each subsequent reporting period afterwards of 12 months. I think it's logical. It allows the sector to respond to the issues that have been found, and it also allows the Cabinet Secretary to justify the strategy, which sometimes comes under fire from other fishing interests. As far as Douglas Ross's amendment is concerned, I do totally support that. And I think the issue that sometimes we miss is the unpredictability that can be given when it comes to major fishing incidents. You know, you are predictable if you know where the assets are. If you don't know where the assets are and how quickly they can get to you, that is a real deterrent. I also take Maurice Golden's amendment as a step forward. On Emma Harper's amendment, I'm questioning slightly, Presiding Officer, in the and I would just like to make it clear that I haven't killed a wild salmon for years and I have no intention of doing so. But sometimes accidents do happen when it comes to wild salmon. Probably, I can see the Cabinet Secretary laughing. She may feel that's because I'm not a sufficiently good enough fisherman to catch them, and that may be true. But I haven't killed one, and I think the issue, though, comes about on the issue of killing fish, is that sometimes accidents do happen when you catch them, and you catch them in the gills, and it causes them to bleed, and that they then die. Now, under the proposal that's been put forward by Ms Harper, the issue would be, Presiding Officer, that you couldn't take that fish away. You'd have to put that dead fish back in the water and just leave it there. That seems odd to me and not something that necessarily I'm quite happy enough to support. But I'd be grateful to hear, Presiding Officer, when the member sums up, if she could explain what should happen in the situation where a dead fish can't be taken away and just has to be put in the water to rot. It seems a strange solution, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I call Rachel Hamilton to speak to Amendment 170 and other amendments in the group.
Presiding Officer, I want to thank Edward Mountain for keeping me awake with his graphic descriptions this evening. But Amendment 170 establishes a general marine code of conduct focusing on a number of important issues. This amendment was developed after recent discussions with the fabulous Berwickshire Marine Reserve, which aims to protect the habitats and species between Eyemouth and St Abbs and ensures that all marine users are responsible in their activities. Amendment 170 was born from the fact that at stage 2, my amendments to ensure that we protect tourists and visitors from the activities of seagulls, which were causing health and safety issues, and they failed and the government didn't support them. But I'm hoping that Nature Scott will come up with a solution after they've had a recent meeting with the community. But I still think it remains that there needs to be a discussion on proving and tackling common coastal issues such as safety around water, awareness of fishing activity, wildlife and beach environments and interference with wildlife, feeding seagulls, discouraging rubbish and litter, and that's what the Berwickshire Marine Reserve do. They have a general marine code of conduct. It is at the moment voluntary, but they're very much working on the educational aspect of making this statement. And I just hope that the government find that the coastal environment, the marine environment, is serious enough to put something like this on the face of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Turning firstly to Amendment 142 from Sarah Boyack. Now, that would duplicate existing requirements under the Marine Scotland Act and introduce specificity to delivery mechanisms for the targets that isn't envisaged under the bill before us today. And it also has different implications for both the inshore and offshore regimes. The amendment is also unnecessary because the updated National Marine Plan 2 is already being designed to help address the global climate and nature crises by delivering sustainable management of our marine shared space. And in addition, the intent is covered by proposed Amendment 22. Now, future marine plans would consider the contribution from planning to biodiversity targets under the Natural Environment Bill and nature recovery under existing requirements in the Marine Scotland Act 2010 without the introduction of this amendment. Now, turning to Amendment 34, just to say that I agree with Emma Harper on this for the reasons that have been set out by her, and I would ask members to support it. The legislation for salmon poaching offences sits across a number of pieces of legislation covering the River Tweed, River Esk and the rest of Scotland respectively. So while the amendment only applies to the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Consolidation Scotland Act 2003, it's vital that we make this amendment to the 2003 Act now and get this legislation on the books while we still have the opportunity. We then need to work with the UK Government to consider alignment of the River Tweed and Upper River Esk to ensure that there is no disparity of penalties for offences in relation to wild salmon across different rivers in Scotland, and consideration will be given to the commencement of these provisions in light of any wider arrangements to be made for the rivers Tweed and Upper Esk too. Just to say on Amendment 21, I was really pleased to work with Maurice Golden in relation to this, because it is really important for us to understand if penalties are effective and where any improvements could be made. This subject is really complex, and it means that we need to have that engagement with the fishing industry as well as other stakeholders. Therefore, an appropriate timescale is needed to ensure the review is robust and it delivers those meaningful outputs. That review will support the delivery of commitments that have already been made in the Scottish Government's 10-year fisheries management strategy, and for those reasons I'm happy to support the amendment. Now, turning now to Amendment 143 again in the name of Sarah Boyack, that would modify powers in the Inshore Fishing Scotland Act to include climate change as a purpose for restricting fishing activity. Now, again, I appreciate Sarah Boyack's arguments and why she was looking to bring some of these amendments back and put them on the record again. But what I would say is the power is unnecessary, because we already have a variety of powers to manage fishing activity in inshore waters, as well as existing requirements to act in a way that mitigates and adapts to climate change in the exercise of our functions. So that's why I wouldn't be supporting this amendment. Now, in relation to Amendment 170 from Rachel Hamilton, I completely understand and would back the principles behind the amendment. But again, it's just one of these amendments that isn't necessary because many of the provisions that have been outlined here are already covered extensively via existing guidance. So in particular, the Scottish Outdoor Access Code already sets out guidance covering almost all of these proposals, including for our beaches and for the foreshore. And guidance in the code is also supplemented by issue-based guidance, which is produced by NatureScot in collaboration with other stakeholders, and it's also been approved by the National Access Forum and published online. And just to add to that, the Scottish Marine Wildlife Watching Code provides recommendations, advice and information in relation to watching and encountering marine wildlife when using Scotland's coasts and seas. So existing wider publications or information via the Scottish Government website also set out what the member is trying to achieve in areas that aren't covered by the Outdoor Access Code or Marine Wildlife Watching Code. So essentially for these reasons, and ultimately to avoid that unnecessary duplication and what could then be a waste of public money and resources, I would encourage members not to support Amendment 170. Now, turning to Amendment 160 and Edward Mountain's amendment, I really welcome he's highlighted the importance of addressing the pressures that face wild Atlantic salmon. However, again, what he's proposing already exists in large part, and it also risks cutting across our international reporting obligations that we have through NASCO. Now, the Wild Salmon Strategy Delivery Group, which Edward Mountain touched on, already reports annually on progress on the implementation plan, and its remit explicitly allows for flexibility in the light of new evidence and other policy developments, which ensures that the programme of work can be adjusted as necessary, which is what I think Edward Mountain is rightly concerned about with his amendment. Now, we do also undertake an evidence-based annual assessment of salmon stocks to inform management of national and international fisheries. And all of that then informs our reporting to NASCO on pressures on and actions to address the issues that we face with wild salmon. Now, given the urgency of the situation, I think what we have to guard against is the risk of creating new burdens which either won't translate into effective delivery or, worse still, could undermine existing delivery, including, for example, the delivery of the poaching amendments that we have also discussed in this group. And ultimately, that's why I'm unable to support this amendment. Now, as for the remaining amendments that we have in this group, 144, 145, 146, 147. All of these were discussed at stage 2. I'm not going to rehearse the arguments again here at stage 3, and I'll therefore not be supporting the amendments for the same reasons I've outlined at stage 2.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I am sorry to have to do this, but well, I am. The Cabinet Secretary deliberately left amendments she does not wish to discuss until the end. I sought to intervene, and I know it's up to the Cabinet Secretary whether she accepts them or not. But Presiding Officer, what I'm trying to ask is, when questions are put to the Government to respond to in winding up that will potentially determine how people vote on specific amendments, how can we as members get that information from the Government if they refuse to even engage in a proper debate on the individual amendments?
Thank you. I know that Mr Ross will be aware that the content of members' contributions across the Chamber is not generally a matter for the Chair, but as always I would consider that members should treat one another with courtesy and respect at all times. And I now call on Sarah Boyack to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 142.
It's been really good listening to this debate this evening, and I know we are all now very tired. We've been going for some time, but I think it's important that members' concerns get on the record. I thought Emma Harper made a powerful justification of amending the 2003 Act to deliver action salmon poaching and the importance of putting in place offences protect salmon and freshwater fish. And Maurice Golden highlighted the importance of reporting on the effectiveness of penalties in ensuring compliance with the Aquaculture and Fisheries Scotland Act 2013. And there were other speakers highlighting the benefits of their amendments. Given the time, I'm just going to very speedily comment about the response from the Cabinet Secretary, and I'd be delighted if she intervened on me. But she basically said that my amendments aren't necessary because it's happening already, but in relation to 146, I would like to know what the timescale is for Scottish Government contributing to the UK marine strategy, how there will be consultation, how the frustration that I've reflected from stakeholders will actually be listened to, because they're not just briefing us for the sake of it. They are. Sorry, do you have an issue you want to intervene on, Ms Harper?
Always through the chair. Emma Harper.
Thank you for taking an intervention. You mentioned my salmon amendments, and I just wondered if you think that if a salmon is accidentally killed in someone who's fishing for salmon, that any investigator would have to reasonably suspect that that was done with the purpose to do it illegally. So my point is that if it was accidental, there is reasonable measures that can be taken place in order to assess that.
Sarah Boyack.
As the member knows, that would be for somebody investigating the case, investigating it, to look at the requirements if we pass this amendment that's been proposed this evening. I think the thing that really struck me was the other issues that are identified as offences, prohibition against using explosive and other noxious substances for the destruction or taking of fish. These are serious issues, and I'm very glad the members raised it in the chamber today. I come back to my final point. Amendment 146. The Cabinet Secretary didn't give us a timetable for when we will have the input from the Scottish Government to the UK marine strategy. And in the absence of clarity, couldn't the Scottish Government just get on with it, given that it's half of the scale of the UK's marine lands? Marine biodiversity, support for our fishing communities is so important. We need to get this right. So I do hope that if my amendments don't go through today, that at the very least they're on the record, and the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Government will have to start listening and acting on the comments by key stakeholders. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. Can I confirm that you wish to press or withdraw Amendment 142?
I'll just move it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. The question is that Amendment 142 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 142 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 20, no 86. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 34 in the name of Emma Harper, already debated, with Amendment 142. Emma Harper, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The amendment is agreed. I call Amendment 21 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated, with Amendment 142. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I call Amendment 143 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated, with Amendment 142. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 143 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 143 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 26, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 144 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 142. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 144 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 144 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 21, no 86. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 145 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 142. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 145 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 145 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 21, no 87. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 146 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 142. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 146 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 146 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 21, no 87. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 147 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated, with amendment 142. Douglas Ross, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. And the question is that amendment 147 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 147 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 38, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And we will conclude our business for today at that point, and we will resume tomorrow at Group 11. And I close this meeting.